Clara calmed down a few moments later and breathed out the last whispers of her anger. She turned to look at Ning and nodded to him. "You did well. Go back and rest," she said. "I'll meet you once before you are to go back once the competition ends." "All right," Ning said. "Where will you be staying for the night?" "Right here," she said. "I don't really want to go to the city. I don't think I have the self-control to hold myself back if I do." Ning nodded. "All right, I'll leave. Take care," he said and got off the carriage. "Your void skill," she shouted. "Don't show it to anyone. It's something that you can easily use to catch someone off guard. You shouldn't reveal its existence in something so simple as this competition." Ning thought for a bit and nodded. He saw Kepla waiting there, along with the knocked-out female next to him. Ning looked at her and then at Kepla. "Can I take her with me?" he asked. "I think she will be a great asset to bring the downfall of our main adversary in this competition." "Sure, if you want to," Kepla said. "But you'll be in trouble if she wakes up soon. Or if someone finds you carrying her." I'll take my chances I guess," Ning said and gently carried the woman. "All right, I'll see you soon." With the woman on his right shoulder and the sword hidden underneath his left arm, Ning left the area, making his way back to the light dance school while the sun still brightened the sky. His body felt a little tired from having used the void essence earlier, but it was still active enough to go back to school in time. People gave him weird looks along the way, but no one stopped him, so he continued going. However, when he did get to the school, he was stopped at the front gates. Obviously, those guards weren't just going to let him go in while carrying an older woman in his arms. They were first worried that she was hurt, and when they realized she was just unconscious, they asked for an explanation. Ning couldn't explain what he was doing easily, so he instead decided to call the people from his school over quickly. The guards were confused, but they complied and sent someone to get his teachers and headmasters. Ning waited for a while for them to come, but before they did someone else found him. "Teacher Sheena." A loud voice shouted at him from nearby. "What happened?" Ning looked to the side at the young man that had arrived. The young man hadn't looked at him yet, so he didn't recognize him, but Ning recognized him instead. This was the young man he was to fight in the next round first tomorrow. "What happened to Teacher Sheena?" the young man asked with a worried look. "She's unconscious," Ning said softly. "How? Did she faint? What happened?" the young man asked. "She was sneaking around me, so I beat her," Ning said simply. The young man took a moment to process the information before looking up at him with confusion. "What?" he asked. "Your teacher came after me, and when I found out she tried to run away. Quite suspicious, isn't it?" he asked. "Well, when she did, I attacked her and now I'm bringing her back." "You bastard!" the young man shouted. "You!" He finally looked at Ning, recognizing him. Doing such, his anger still didn't subside. Instead, it almost increased even further. "Get your hands off my teacher," he said, going so far as to pull out a sword from nowhere. Ning frowned a bit, but he didn't do anything. He wasn't sure about the rules regarding fights outside of the arena, so he just sat there, making sure the guard got a full view of what was happening. At the same time, he also placed the woman toward the man so his attacks would instead fall on her if he even tried to do so. The man seemed adamant about attacking him and even went as far as to bring out 2 arms of his essence soul, each of which surprisingly had long vine-like tendrils made up of water. The arms were purple in color, marred by the purple sky after the setting sun. Ning got his sword ready, just in case he needed to attack as well. Suddenly the gates opened wide and a single tongue of fire flew past the young man, missing him by mere inches. The young man stepped back and got ready to fight whoever it was when he saw the teachers from the Black Hawk Academy. The headmaster appeared right in front of Ning and glared at the young man. "How dare you try to attack our disciple?" he shouted at the young man. The young man frowned, stepping back as there was no way for him to compete against the headmaster himself. "Your student hurt our teacher. I want a proper explanation, or I will report this behavior to the committee and have your academy expelled from the competition," he said without any fear. The headmaster had to take this threat seriously. "Young man, explain what is happening," he said. "This woman has a light essence core and can go invisible with her skills. I found her lurking around outside the carriage where I met my friends. When I did, she tried to run away, so I caught her along with my friend's help," he said. "What?" The teachers turned toward Ning. "She was lurking around you." "Yes, Following most likely, under someone's order, Ning said. I see, the headmaster said. Then I will require your headmaster to answer what is going on here. The young man frowned but had to nod in the end. This wasn't a situation he could deal with. It's not just that, headmaster, Ning said. If she followed me without anyone knowing, imagine what else she could have done on her own. Like say, poisoning someone's food. The headmaster's eyes widened when he heard that. That had caused him a lot of problems and he wasn't going to let it slip away at the slightest chance of its prospect. If the possibility is there, then we must drag the truth out of her, one way or another. You've done well. We will handle the rest from here on, Teacher Hyan told Ning and sent him back to his room. Ning wanted to see how they dealt with the woman, but he was also a little tired from all the fighting today, so he decided to take his leave. He returned to his room and quickly met with a plethora of questions from the guys that were waiting for him to tell them about his friend. They didn't believe that it was just a friend at all. Ning couldn't tell them anything else, so most of them were forced to leave without any answer. A girl came to meet with you from so far away, there's no way she doesn't like you, the prince said after most of the people that weren't from his room left. No, she really is just a friend, Ning said. But she could be more, the prince said. Don't miss this opportunity. Ning sighed. The conversation was basically pointless, but he couldn't tell these people that he had been married for over millions of years now. He thought of taking the opportunity to ask the prince about his grandfather and family, but since Clara had said that she didn't think she was ready, Ning stopped. There was no reason for him to get involved in something that wasn't his problem. He left to get some food afterward as everyone gathered for dinner. Ning noticed a significant absence in the number of teachers and wondered how it was going with finding the truth. He had yet to tell anyone about what had happened, so everyone was equally concerned and confused as well. It was around when Ning finished up his meal that the teachers finally came to the dining hall. As they got around to getting food for themselves, the headmaster turned towards Ning and spoke. You're finished eating, huh? He asked. Ning nodded as he was about ready to leave. Well, stick around for now, the headmaster said. I have something to talk with you about. After the students left, the headmaster finally started speaking. Can you tell me what happened exactly? How did you catch that woman? He asked. Ning thought for a brief moment and nodded. I was with my friend when she asked me to show what I had learned. I showed her my void essence, and accidentally stripped away that woman's light concealment. That's how I found her and subsequently captured her while she was trying to run away. The headmaster's eyes were wide when Ning was done with his story. He looked toward the other teachers who were equally just as surprised as he was. Wait a second, did you say void essence? The headmaster asked, completely forgetting about the main problem they were talking about just beforehand. Ning nodded. I learned a skill from the shop back in the academy. And you managed to learn it? You managed to use it? He asked. Ning shrugged. It wasn't that hard, he said. The headmaster took a deep breath as he tried to calm himself down. Dear God, just how pure is your essence? He couldn't help but ask. To generate void essence, it has to be extremely pure as far as I know. Void essence just doesn't exist except under very, very rare circumstances, which I do not believe has happened in our continent yet. Backquote. Ning nodded. That's what it said in the skill book too, he said, so I learned it. The headmaster thought for a bit. Okay, let me talk about what I want to talk to you about. Yes? Ning asked. As I mentioned my promise earlier, I was planning on giving you 2 rewards based on your performance, the headmaster said. However, something has changed now. Ning's eyes narrowed for a moment. What changed? He asked. That woman you brought in, the headmaster said. She's been found guilty of tampering with our academy by sabotaging our food supplies. On top of that, she was also found guilty of following you around with maleficent intent, so the Essence Heart Academy is now about to gain a rather large punishment. Oh, Ning got curious. What sort of punishment? The headmaster shook his head. I do not know just yet, the committee members are still deciding. However, whatever the decision is, it will be bad for them without a doubt. They will no longer have a chance at victory at all. Oh, Ning said with a surprised look. I did not expect my actions to produce such a drastic result. Their actions were drastic as well, the headmaster said. Anyway, given the situation, I've decided on something. I will no longer let you have 2 rewards. Instead, I will give you 3. Ning's eyes widened a bit in happiness. Oh, what sort? He asked excitedly. The headmaster smirked. What exactly do you want? Do you have any idea? He asked. Ning thought for a moment. Honestly, I'm not sure I know as much about what is good for me and what is not when compared to you, so I would like to request the headmaster to make the decision for me. Haha, okay then. I will make the decision for you. The headmaster reached into his clothes and pulled out something. He tossed it at Ning, who quickly caught it in the air and looked at it. It was a small cylindrical piece of metal with a small purple gem attached to the front of it. The entire thing was on a rather sturdy-feeling rope. The thread is made from a spider essence beast known as the strong iron spider. It's known for its strings that have unnaturally strong and can't even be destroyed by someone in the essence soul realm. As for the metal itself, it is a titanium alloy that is superbly strong, the headmaster said. As for the last purple crystal, that is just how much space was crammed into that small place. I see, Ning said, looking at the object in his hand. Thank you for the storage artifact, headmaster. Ning looked at the storage artifact with a curious look on his face. He would have to use some essence to bond with the item so that he could use the space inside of it. From what he could judge based on what he knew and saw, this thing was large enough to hold an entire room's worth of items in it. While nowhere near impressive for Ning, he was still quite happy to finally get something where he could store his sword. For the second reward, the headmaster reached into his own storage artifact and pulled out. I will hand you these essence crystals. He brought out a bunch of crystals, each one as large as the largest one that Ning had seen, all amounting to nearly 30 in total. Ning's eyes widened in shock as such an amount of crystal would take him forever to acquire on his own. Do I deserve this? He asked, trying to see if there was something else going on than just rewards. Was the headmaster trying to give him these things to try and make him feel like he was indebted to the academy? No, that's your reward. It's what you deserve for getting into the top 16, the headmaster said. You will love them. Each one of them is extremely pure. I had to buy them off of the Light Dance Academy to give them to you. Well, then thank you, Ning said as he gathered up all the essence crystals. As for the third one, the headmaster looked through his storage artifact. Wait for a bit. I hadn't planned for this one, so I will need to search for a bit. I wasn't prepared to give anything to you other than those two today. Ning let the headmaster search for whatever it was while he checked the essence crystals. As the headmaster had mentioned, it was indeed quite pure and would help him a lot to improve his essence to the next level. He couldn't wait for the day when he too formed an essence soul of his own. After a while, the headmaster finally spoke. Aha! There is it. I knew I had it here, somewhere, he said and brought out a small, thin book. The headmaster gave him the book, which Ning took, and started reading to see what it was. As soon as he read the title, his eyes immediately widened and he quickly looked back at the headmaster in shock. Is this real? He asked. It is, the headmaster said, amused at his expression. He liked to see youngsters get surprised at what he was giving them. Then, this essence exists as well? Ning asked. Haha, yes, the headmaster said. I had decided on giving you armor to protect yourself from the ones that I had. However, now that I learn you can create any type of essence, I see no reason to not give you this as it is obviously better. Ning nodded without much thought. He could only look at the book in absolute awe. It was a technique book, another skill that he could learn if he had the time. Judging by the size of the book, he could most likely learn it over the course of the night itself, if he was willing to lose some sleep over it. Thank you so much, headmaster, Ning said with genuine glee on his face for gaining such a thing. All right, go now and rest. You'll need the time to gain back your essence, the headmaster said. Now that you're in the top 16, you have 4 more fights to go. It is unlikely you'll go even past the next one, but if you do, ho, I will find you something even way better than this. Ning excitedly thanked the headmaster and placed everything inside the returned back to his own room. Everyone was focused on their own task, so Ning went over to his own bed and took out the book to read it. The book itself was quite short as the skill for the most part was simply creating the essence and then launching it directly at the target. It was akin to a fireball skill, except the ball would be made up of a different essence entirely. I wish I could do the same thing with void essence as well, he thought. Just attack someone with a projectile made up of void essence and cancel whatever technique they're about to use. Unfortunately, that wasn't really possible as of now without any technique of his own. Ning wondered if there were ways to create techniques, to do what he wanted with them. He would have to try out in the coming days once the tournament was over. Tomorrow was the last day, so Ning had to prepare for that as well. He brought out the half-used pure essence crystal from his drawer. Then, he started absorbing it with his eyes closed while trying to remember the technique he was learning at the same time. He tried to do two things at once and somewhat succeeded in it. Even though the book was small, there was still quite a lot to learn, remember, and apply in such a short time, so Ning had to bring his full concentration into the job. He fell into some sort of trance where he unconsciously absorbed the essence while mentally learning at the same time. Also at the same time, his body got the rest it deserved as it stood still without Ning's movements. It was only after midnight that Ning woke up from the trance and realized that the essence crystal in his hand had vanished. He had absorbed it all and was back to having a full core. Then, he was free to learn the technique all he wanted. When the morning came, Ning was asleep on his bed after a long night of training and had to be forcefully awakened by the others around him. Once he was up, he got dressed up and got ready to leave for the arena, for the final day of the competition. The final day of the competition was celebrated even harder than the previous days. More people than ever had arrived at the arena early in the morning and were waiting for the matches to start. When the entirety of the Blackhawk Academy arrived, they were greeted with a number of audiences that blew them away. So many, one of the students said when they saw the arena from their sitting area. It's like people were waiting for the last day to arrive to watch everything, another one said. Everyone started revealing their surprise at the crowd's size and intensity. Look. One of them pointed somewhere, forcing everyone to turn to look. A small tower had been erected toward the north of the arena, including a small viewing room created for the elite. Who do you think is in there? Someone asked. Maybe the headmasters go there later, one of them said. I see some movement, another person said, pointing there again. Oh, I recognize him. It's our head of the family, 10 said. Sabern Foreman, leader and head of the Foreman family that unofficially ruled the White Owl region, was up at the VIP platform, looking down at the matches from an amazing vantage point. Along with him were a few other officials from around the Dominion, and one important group that even he had to bow down to. Your grandson and granddaughter have made it to the top 32, with your grandson even reaching the top 16. You must be truly proud of them, Your Majesty. Sabern Foreman spoke as politely as he could to the man that sat next to him. Proud? The old man asked. No, it is expected of them to reach this high. I expect them to reach the top 8 easily. The old man had amazing long flowing white hair and a beard that did not seem to fall even with his age. He was slightly muscular, despite his old age, and wore a fully black robe with golden inscriptions and embroidery all over it. The gold was not gold, but rather brilliant yellow light essence that was sewn onto the cloth which appeared to look gold. The talent one needed to make light essence not only that thin but also long-lasting was not something just anyone could acquire. Only the highest of the highest talent and essence rank was needed to do so. One of the most prominent depictions using the golden light was that of a bird with only the outlines being in the light, while the bird itself was entirely black. It was the image of a hawk staring back at the person who stared at it. The Blackhawk design was the signature telling that someone was from the Black family, the rulers of the Blackhawk region as well as the Blackhawk Dominion. The old man was Darren Black, the current emperor of the Blackhawk Dominion. You must have high expectations of them then, Your Majesty, Sabern spoke. What would you say is the rank that you hope they reach by the end? Top 2, the emperor said without any hesitation. Top 4 is good too, but I have higher expectations of them than that. Haha, my royal father doesn't like to show it, but he is very proud of my niece and nephew. The man with similar clothing as the old man that sat next to him replied. To be honest, I imagine them both entering the top 2 as well. The man had a head full of black hair and a clean-shaven face. He had a small, handsome face and looked no older than 30 years of age. This was the Crown Prince of the Blackhawk Dominion, Damian Black, the next ruler of the Blackhawk Dominion. Top 2, huh? Sabern said looking down below. He could notice that the twin prince and princess were amongst their newly arrived group and remembered their last day's battles. The prince's rank was higher than most if not all the fighters in the competition. His essence rank was in the high essence soul realm, so it was expected of him to reach far. It was even believed that he had been holding back a lot. However, in the princess's case, he couldn't see just why she could be so strong. Sure, she was in the low essence soul realm as well, but so was everyone. And her essence core was light, something that wasn't considered very good to begin with. If someone traced her footsteps back throughout this competition, one would see that she had gotten lucky one after another at every step, with her opponents always being weaker than her. So, Sabern Foreman could not understand why the Emperor and the Crown Prince would ever have so much faith in the girl. As he stared at the two of them, his eyes fell on another young man that stood next to them. That young man, he thought. It was the young man that his son had notified him of. The one with a sword so heavy that one couldn't carry it. He had seen the sword in action, so he understood a bit as to why it could be heavy. However, he wanted to see more, to see it reach its peak. He doubted a young man at Essence Manifestation Realm could give him that. He sat back on his chair and looked down, waiting for the matches to start. Below at the arena, Ning and the rest were preparing to go to the hall. Ning, Prince Alan, Hyandus, Princess Elena, and Yorsha were taken away by the teacher toward the hall in preparation for today's matches. When they arrived, however, they were a little surprised by the lack of people there. As it was already down to top 32, there weren't many there, to begin with, but something more was going on. The headmaster suddenly arrived next to them with a wide smile and gave them the good news. Because of their actions that went against the competition rules, Essence Heart Academy and all of its participants have been officially thrown out of the competition. You guys now have one less thing to worry about. Wait, so Essence Heart Academy is done? The prince asked with a surprised look. Yes, they're done, the headmaster said. Gone from the competition. All 3 of their remaining players are disqualified. Oh. Ning cried in surprise. So does that mean I get to go to top 8 now? Did you have an Essence Heart Academy student as your next opponent? The headmaster asked. Yes, Ning said, pointing to the board. It was the guy we met yesterday outside of the gate. So I can now skip him and go to the quarterfinals, huh? That is amazingly lucky for you then, the headmaster said. I suppose I'm somewhat lucky too then. The princess spoke all of a sudden. My current opponent was supposed to be a girl from that very academy too. The headmaster looked at the board again with surprise in his eyes. Haha, our academy sure is lucky. This is fate helping us for the bad start that we received. Would have been better if it was Yorsha that got the next fighter, the prince said. She could have skipped to the top 16 easily. My sister could have instead just fought her way through. Well, we can't all ask for miracles, Yorsha said. I'm fine with where I've reached. If I am capable, I will go forward on my own. Good, the headmaster said. Good luck to you all. I will head over to the audience stand now. The headmaster left, leaving the group of 5 students with a single teacher. They remained in their corner of the hall that was better fitted to hold them all. There were too many participants the last time around to make good preparation, as that could make it difficult to move around in the hall. But now that there were no more than 30 people left, they had prepared a more formal section for all the school. The Essence Heart Academy's section remained empty, however. The host for the day started by welcoming everyone to the competition and then explained to them the actions that the competition holders had taken against the Essence Heart Academy. They didn't give the exact reason, other than a vague implication that they had broken the committee's trust by breaking some of its rules. As a result, they would be keeping all the points they had acquired until the day of the competition, but everything afterward would be invalid. Participants that had lost to a student of the Essence Heart Academy would gain the next round's points if they had lost to someone from that academy. Once that was done, the remaining half of the top 32 continued from where it was left the last time. The 9th match began with 2 students from other academies going up to fight. Everyone watched the matches carefully, as any of these people could be their opponents today. One needed to be ready for anything that came so that they couldn't miss out on any fights at all. The next 2 matches took place within the next 15 minutes as well, all of which resulted in making a clear demonstration of just how strong the ones that had reached this rank were. The 12th match was a freebie, as one of the participants in that match was someone from the Essence Heart Academy. The 13th match came around, and 2 people went onto the stage. Within the next minute, the match ended. Everyone watched in silence as they realized that there was someone strong that had been hiding until then. It was a fighter from the Peace World Academy, and he was someone in the High Essence Soul realm. He had been hiding his rank all this time, and that had taken everyone in the hall by surprise. The only other person that had shown such a rank until now was the prince. "You've got stiff competition up next, sis," the prince said, looking at Princess Elena, who was glaring at the illusory screen that showed the fight in the air. Her eyes shifted to the young man that walked in all high and mighty and gave the prince a look of mockery, telling him that he wasn't the only strong one there. "Oh, he's annoying," the prince said while keeping his smile. "You need to kick his ass, sis." "You can't tell me what to do," the princess said. Then don't kick his ass," the prince said. "Will you be doing the reverse now?" The princess sighed and looked away. It was her match now, but because it was against someone disqualified, she didn't even need to go to the stage. "I still can't believe how lucky you've been, sis," the prince said. "You've only come across fighters with essence manifestation realm or with weak essence souls. You haven't had to fight seriously until now." "That's going to change next," the princess said. "I suppose," the prince said. "Well," Yorsha suddenly spoke. "This is me then." "Good luck," the prince said, and the others followed. "I'll do my best," Yorsha said. Everyone nodded. No one expected her to win at all, but they wanted her to do the best she could. As her name was called out, Yorsha stood and walked to the stage alongside her opponent, a girl from the Crimson Wings Academy. Yorsha frowned the entire time she made it to the stage. She knew she was going to lose, but there was nothing wrong with trying to win. They arrived on the stage and went over to the opposite side, waiting for the referee to start the match. While waiting, they each brought out their weapons and got ready. Start. As soon as the match started, Yorsha activated her burning sun skill as she increased the temperature of the entire surrounding. However, it was then that her opponent brought out her essence soul that made Yorsha immediately lose all hopes of victory. It was a fire essence soul, which took nearly no damage from her fire attacks, which meant she was up against the worst type of enemies the members of her family could. Yorsha tried her hardest, but her fire could not burn someone that not only had a fire essence soul, but also was talented enough to reach the top 32. Within a few minutes of the fight starting, she was beaten by her opponent. The referee had to come in and stop the flaming swords of her opponent's essence soul from reaching her in the end. She returned to the hall with some disappointment in herself, but she had already expected the failure, so she couldn't be mad about it. "You did great out there," the teacher said as soon as Yorsha arrived. "Thanks," she said meekly. The others went on to congratulate her too for reaching top 32. That wasn't something so easily reached by many. "Don't worry," Ning said. "You're young. You'll do far better in the future." Yorsha's eyes narrowed. "You're only 3 years older than me at best too," she said. Yeah," Ning replied. One last match took place and then the top 32 were over and they moved on to top 16. For top 16, the matches changed a bit. The host announced that this time, instead of 5 minutes per battle, everyone was going to get 10. With the extra bit of time, everyone could slow down their pace and fight better. Since there weren't that many fights remaining, the committee saw no qualms in doing that. The very first match of top 16 was called out, which was Ning's match. However, since his opponent had been disqualified, they moved on to the second match. The second match took some time to finish and Ning saw that his next opponent was going to be a person with Earth Essence Core. The third match began between the prince and someone from the Grand Wool Academy. After a somewhat difficult battle that was only difficult because the prince didn't go all out from the start, the match ended with the prince's victory. After the third match was over, the fourth match started between the prince's bodyguard Hyandus and someone from the Peace World Academy. This was the fight that took the most time yet conclude. The opponent in this match was someone with a water essence soul and he covered himself in water, making it difficult for Hyandus to properly attack him. His wind essence soul didn't give him much offensive strength, so it took some time for him to use his spear to weaken his opponent, while dodging every attack, to gain his victory. 3 out of the 8 fighters in the quarterfinals were confirmed to be the Black Hawk Academy members. At this point, they had already won the entire competition. Now, all that left was to see who had won it exactly. Hyandus was breathless, and by other people's senses, essence-less when he returned back to the hall again. He was congratulated on his hard-earned victory and allowed to rest while the next 2 fights took place. The 5th and the 6th matches were won by 2 people with fire essence and water essence. Then, it came time for the 7th match. The young man from the Peace World Academy stood up and looked toward the Black Hawk Academy's direction. He was the second person in the entire competition to reveal to have a high essence soul realm. He was without a doubt the second strongest person in the entire competition. He looked toward the princess and bowed. "Let us have a fun match, princess," he said. His words were polite, but his tone was not. He was simply taunting the princess as he knew that he would win. Elena stood and walked toward the door without even acknowledging him. The young man followed next to her, but even as they went to the stage, she did not show any sign of noticing the man. And that pissed him off. "Well, at least the princess reached top 16. That's one better than me," Yorsha said. The prince turned around. "What do you mean?" "I mean the princess did good to reach where she's reached, nothing else," Yorsha said. "It would have been better if she continued moving on, but this is the last of the line for her." The prince gave a small smile. "Are you saying my sister is going to lose this match?" he asked. Even Hyandus shook his head when he heard that. Ning and the teacher got a little curious at where the conversation seemed to be headed. "Are you saying she has a chance to win?" Yorsha asked as she looked back at the live image of the princess on the stage. "Why not?" the prince asked. But her enemy is a rank above her and has an earth essence soul. The princess is only in the low essence soul realm, and on top of that, she has moonlight essence core, one of, if not the worst when it comes to offensive capabilities. "Are you saying she's going to win through that?" Yorsha asked. The prince gave a wide smile. "Did you think Elena has shown all of her skills in this competition when she hasn't even been pushed as hard yet?" he asked before chuckling. "She has something hidden?" Ning couldn't help but ask. He was truly curious about the princess's fighting capabilities. The prince laughed some more. "You guys better get seated then. You will soon witness something incredible," he said. Everyone turned their eyes to the screen. The princess took a deep breath while her opponent seemed to have his earth essence soul ready to fight. "I'm sorry, princess," he said, "but your puny moonlight and light essence isn't going to work. This is the end of the line for you. Fight!" the referee shouted. The young man rushed toward the princess all of a sudden, wishing to end the fight all at once. However, when he got close, his eyes widened as something happened. The princess breathed out and all of a sudden her aura changed. That which was only at low essence soul suddenly reached a higher level at high essence soul. The audience's eyes went wide as they realized the princess had been hiding her powers all this time. "You!" The young man freaked out a little seeing the princess bring out a level of essence that he didn't think she had. He stopped in his tracks and quickly flew back away from her. Once he was at a safe distance, he looked at her with confused looks. He had thought he was the only one who had managed to hide it from everyone, but it seemed the princess was even better at it than him. What he didn't know was that he had only managed to hide it from the other participants who were weaker like him. The referee and various teachers had most definitely already noticed it. However, even the referee was confused when sensing the aura that came out of the princess. That was not what he was expecting seeing someone like her on the stage. Was she not weak? Was her moonlight essence core that well hidden that even the adults hadn't seen it? It wasn't just the referee, of course. Everyone but a few people were surprised at the sudden revelation. Up in the tower where the royal family members and other rulers of the Dominion stayed, the emperor couldn't help but scoff. "These idiots," he spoke out. "They thought my granddaughter was weak. If they keep it up, they'll be killed by people they underestimate." The crown prince chuckled a bit. As for the rulers, they were wide-eyed at the situation. Sabern Foreman especially was more than surprised as he had watched her fight through multiple battles the other day, and nowhere had the princess shown such a capability. How did she hide it? He still couldn't believe. Aside from them in the crowd, even Ning and Yorsha were equally surprised, including the teacher. What is going on?" Yorsha couldn't help but ask. The princess was in the high essence soul realm. How was this hidden from us for multiple days? Ning stayed silent, trying to make sense of the situation. He had definitely sensed only a low essence soul realm from her. Even if he was mistaken, what about the machine that tested their essence? It had shown no sign of the princess having such a strong aura. "How is this possible, Prince Alan?" the teacher asked. "We've seen the princess bring out her essence soul. It wasn't strong before. Did she break through last night?" "Ha." The prince laughed. "You guys still haven't caught on to it, have you? You're in for a treat then." Hearing the prince's excited sound, everyone looked toward the screen, in hopes of seeing just what it was that made the princess's situation so incredible. On the stage, the princess stood at a distance without any weapons, not even the light sword, and faced the young man whose mind was going through a lot of turmoil. The young man had a water sword in his hand and fire armor inside. Even then, he hesitated at the weirdness of the situation and didn't immediately attack again. He thought for a few seconds before confirming something. "It really is the high essence soul realm, isn't it?" he asked. "So it is not some sort of illusion to dupe me." The prince narrowed her eyes a little, giving a slightly disgusted look toward the young man, who was immediately offended by it. "Ha ha ha. So you hid it until now," the young man shouted. "What does that matter? You've merely stepped up to my level. All you've done is placed yourself on equal playing field as me. That does not mean that you will win at all. You still have to fight." The princess finally sighed. "Are you expecting me to give up after hearing your long speech, or are you actually going to fight against me?" he asked. "You, ha ha ha, princess, do you truly believe that you have a chance at victory here?" he asked. "You might have the same essence rank as me, but please do not forget that while you have a moonlight essence core, I have an earth essence core. You have no chance at victory here." The princess lifted her two arms in front of her. "It will soon be apparent who is the victor here." Then, she started using her technique. The young man instantly started using his to create a simple barrier of stone, as he would need nothing more to stop the incoming moonlight essence attack. As the stone barrier finished forming, his eyes changed a little while his face fell. He couldn't help but be surprised when he sensed that the essence being used on the other side was not that of moonlight, but something else. Something he rarely sensed. Before he could realize what it was, the attack landed on the stone wall, breaking it immediately as the rest of it started spilling around him. The young man immediately recognized the direness of the situation and brought out his earth essence soul, a 10 meters tall earthen figure that was completely humanoid and seemed to be made out of many pieces of stones. A layer of rock grew out from the ground, and only then did the princess's attack was finally stopped. The young man stared in awe at the remainder of the attack. What had remained was a pool of glowing red liquid that seemed to have molten most of the stones that came into contact with it. The young man gulped in fear when he realized that the attack the princess had used was in fact not moonlight essence, but rather something entirely different. The princess had used magma as her attack. She had a magma essence core. The young man couldn't believe what he was seeing, but the truth was right in front of her. The truth became even more true when two giant, glowing orange arms appeared from behind her, followed by the rest of the essence soul, which was 10 meters tall as well. Her magma essence soul was fully on display in the fight, surprising the many thousands of people who had not expected to see something like this at all. Elena's magma essence soul was 10 meters tall with hands that split into long vines that dripped magma whenever they moved. The soul had no legs, but a single long magma fountain that sprayed all across the ground. The soul's hair freely flowed behind it, dripping magma there as well. Soon, there was a pool of magma all around Elena as she fully revealed her magma essence soul. "What's going on?" a few people up in the tower asked when they saw the magma essence soul come out from the princess. "I swear the princess had a moonlight essence soul until recently," another person mentioned. The emperor put on a smug face, incredibly happy with his granddaughter's performance, and simply watched what happened next without speaking a single word. The princes started sending out attacks. Blobs of molten rocks fell all around the young man as he desperately tried to stop it all. He created rocks to stop them, but that did little to the liquid rocks that flowed around them. He couldn't directly touch the lava with his essence soul as the stones that made it up would burn and melt, hurting him in the end. All he could do was defend with his techniques and fight back whenever he could. However, as time went on, he found it impossible for him to fight back against the princes. She started melting the very ground they stood on, heating the entire arena, making it not just difficult to find a footing but be in there as a whole. The heat from the lava was just as worse as it was from a very strong fire essence user, and the princess wasn't even intending to use it that way. The people in the audience and hall were equally ecstatic watching the fight, just as they were confused. They couldn't understand why the princess suddenly had a magma essence core. The same questions floated around inside the players' hall as Yorsha and Ning asked the prince what was happening. Everything made them so curious that Ning nearly broke his own rule and asked the system about it all. What is happening? Yorsha demanded. Prince, tell us. The prince, being bombarded by questions, finally gave up. Fine, I'll tell you. She always had a magma essence core. Yorsha shut up for a moment before her eyes narrowed. That explains neither the high essence soul realm nor the fact that she used to have a moonlight essence soul. What happened there? She asked. It's still there. It's just hiding, the prince said. Hiding? Ning asked. The moonlight essence soul hides when Elena decides to use the magma essence core, he said. Both the teacher and Ning understood what that meant at once. Wait, are you saying the princess has dual cores? Ning finished the teacher's question. You guys got it. The prince said happily. Yes, Elena was born with 2 cores. Ever since she was young, she was made to absorb 2 separate types of essence to her 2 separate cores. She can only use 1 core at a time though, the prince explained. From a young age, grandfather gave us both unique essence crystals to absorb. She got magma, I got ice. But when we realized that each core absorbed separately, grandfather realized that he could get her to have 2 completely outrageous cores. He made her cultivate pure essence for the time being, which forced her to absorb moonlight essence when there wasn't any pure essence. She continued on, and at some point, it was clear that grandfather couldn't get her any other crystals that would be good for her, so she was forced to try and instead have a core filled with pure essence. By that time, however, her core had already absorbed the moonlight's attribute, becoming a moonlight core, the prince said. She has worked twice as hard as anyone in this place to send both of her cores to Essence Soul Realm. To say that we are proud of her is an understatement. Sometimes, it feels like I'm following behind her, trying to catch up. Or else, she will leave me behind, the prince said. The other 3 were slack-jawed at the information they just received. Yorsha couldn't believe that there was such a thing as a person having 2 cores. The teacher couldn't believe that someone with 2 cores was amongst them, and Ning was simply surprised she managed to keep it hidden throughout so much of the competition. Hyandus seemed to know all of this, so he remained quiet, watching the others talk about it. So, the princess's primary core is actually the magma core? Ning asked. Has she been holding back this entire time? Yes, that's her primary core. And no, she hasn't been holding back. She just didn't need to use it until now, the prince said. Still shocked, the group turned to look at the stage again as the match was coming to an end. The magma essence soul behind the princess that dripped magma all around her, pulled something out of its arm. A long magma javelin formed in the essence Su's arm, and it pointed directly at the young man's own essence soul. If the javelin hit, the young man was certain that the essence soul would certainly be destroyed. If it was completely destroyed, he would certainly die. He thought of ways to defend himself, but nothing would faze the princess at all. She was way too strong for him. He looked toward the referee for help, but even the referee seemed to struggle a little in this heat. Did that mean he wouldn't be saved? His head whipped toward the princess at the earliest sign of movement and immediately retracted his essence soul before she could throw her attack. I give up, he shouted with his hands in the air. Don't hurt me, please, princess. Elena stopped her attack before it went off. The javelin melted from the soul's hand, falling to the ground down below. The essence soul disappeared behind the princess as the referee announced the result after a few seconds. Princess Elena had won her match. The princess returned to her place with the rest of the Black Hawk Academy members. As soon as she arrived there, she was congratulated by everyone around her as her performance on the stage was more than incredible. You were amazing, princess, Yorsha shouted. She had forgotten all about her own loss and was reveling in the princess's victory. Why did you not tell us that you have dual cores? Oh, you guys realized, Elena said. Did you tell them? The prince shrugged. She asked a lot, he said, pointing toward Yorsha. That came off as quite a surprise, Ning told her. You hit it all rather well. That made for a nice match to watch, princess. Thank you, the princess said. She sat next to her brother and acknowledged the congratulations from the others before looking at the stage. Huh? I messed it up quite a bit, didn't I? She asked. No more than usual when you use that core, the princess said. The teacher turned his head toward the brackets and spoke. Ning, it's your turn next. Ning nodded. His eyes shifted to a guy that stood in the distance, wearing a set of purple uniforms. He was an Earth Essence user and he was his next opponent. There was still a bit of time as the stage had to be fixed before they went. Well, I am right after Ning, the prince said. How do you want our fight to go, Hyan? Hyandus cringed a little from the side. I have no chance of winning against you, prince. I will instead just give up when it starts. What? Come on. You need to fight a little, the prince said. Sure, I'll win, but don't you want to see how far you can push me? No, Hyandus said. I refuse to fight because I don't want to see how far I can push you. You will use the fight as evidence that you don't need any guard and start running around alone without any protection. True, Elena said. Absolutely do not fight with him. Tisk. The prince clicked his tongue. And here I had such a great plan. The stage was fixed and the host came to the stage to announce the final match of the top 16. When it was over, he came over once again to announce that the quarterfinals were going to begin. The one who won everything would be one of these 8. Ning stood up from his seat and so did the purple-clothed man. They both walked out onto the stage and felt the lingering heat from the princess's battle. While the stage was fixed, it seemed they couldn't clear away the heat just yet. It wasn't hot enough to bother either of them, so no one found any problems with it. Ning stood on one side and looked at his opponent. The young man had an Earth Essence core, but he wondered what else he had. Did he have any weapons on him? Ning brought out his own weapon, the Earth Sword. It was so much more convenient to have somewhere to store the sword. He no longer had to worry about accidentally cutting someone or something because of how large the sword was. Ning's opponent brought out his weapon as well, a wind sword. Ning didn't find that as threatening as any other sword could have been. They waited for the referee to announce the start and began fighting. As soon as the announcement came, Ning threw out multiple rocks at the man, each flying at an incredible speed. The young man slammed his feet on the ground, causing a crack to form, from which grew a single pillar of earth that stopped all the attacks. Then, he took a second step and another crack grew from where he stepped, growing toward Ning in the distance. When it arrived next to Ning, it grew out as another pillar of rock again. Ning stepped aside at the last moment and cut through the rock with his sword. He then used essence on his sword to create a similar rock pillar, but at a slanted angle to toss the remainder toward the young man at the edge of the stage. The young man easily warded it off and took another step, using the same attack once more. Ning was a little confused, but he let it happen. He easily dodged it once again, but he wondered why he wasn't using any more attacks. Some sort of bait? Was he trying to lure him in? Or was he trying to bait him into thinking that was all he could do? Ning did not expect the young man to just be cautious of him. While the young man was theoretically the stronger one in this fight, he had seen many stronger people fall to Ning's immense variety of techniques that were seemingly endless. Not only were they endless, but they were also rather unique, with none being used before at any point in most of the fights. Lightning, space, these weren't the types of essence that were easily found, and as such many weren't used to this sort of technique. Ning's opponent was just afraid of what else he could use. In the tower, Sabern Foreman rested his head on his palm as he leaned to the side. He watched the match from far away, looking for anything special about the sword in Ning's hands. He mostly believed that his son was simply trying to get back at Ning for the humiliation he received a few days ago, but on the smaller off chance that he was correct, he wanted to not miss it. While he believed his son was lying, he knew there could be an essence of truth hidden in that lie somewhere, and so, he watched. The rest of the people on the tower were also quite enjoying the match. Someone in the Essence Manifestation realm defeating multiple low Essence Soul realm fighters was something unheard of. They hadn't watched the previous matches but wanted to see if they could figure out how he could win this time. The Emperor especially watched him with keen eyes. However, his eyes didn't seem to be on the person at all, but on his sword. Could it be, Ning's fight was only starting? He used neither lightning nor space essence as no opportunity showed itself, but he did use his wind essence movement technique to move around the stage to dodge the young man's attacks. If nothing, he wanted him to stop using the same monotonous attacks. He hated that this young man was treating this like a video game, where he could win by spamming the same attack over and over. Ning wondered what he could do though. Lightning essence took some time to gather and space was obvious. Void essence could be used, but it would leave him without much if he used it. He wondered if he should use the other technique, but he wanted to keep it for a later fight. For now, he shouldn't have to use it. He stepped to the side and cut the upcoming pillar in two. He became so frustrated by the same attack over and over that he thought he was going to lose it. Take your own attack. See what it feels like, he shouted and poured some of his essence into the sword. The young man sensed essence gathering beneath him and moved to the side. A rock spike grew out from underneath him. At the same moment he jumped, Ning sent out another rock attack that he threw in the young man's direction. The young man needed to use a technique to create the rock pillars, which he couldn't while in midair. Even if he stepped, it would be too late. In the end, an essence hand came out from him and blocked it all. The young man landed properly inside. Now that he had used his essence soul, there wasn't any point in holding back. He should go all out and fight as well as he could. He wasn't really holding out beforehand, but for the sake of testing his opponent, he had to. However, he was done testing. If he continued it, he would eventually end up making a mistake that would cost him. It's just an essence manifestation realm expert. I can easily beat him, he thought, and the second essence soul hand grew out from behind him. The first hand that had solidified to protect him had turned translucent, like the one that came afterward. Ning watched as the two hands grew and expected the head to pop out next. Instead, what came out was a hand that was half a sword. Then, another hand came out that was a sword hand as well. 4 hands. Ning thought. That wasn't very rare, but it was still an uncommon sight to see. Then, another arm came out. This time, it was a rock spike more than a hand. While Ning was perplexed, another rock spike arm came out. Bastard hid his arms until now, Ning thought. He had seen this person fight, but he mostly just fought with his 2 soul arms. No one on the stage had any idea that he had this many arms. The head finally came out, and then the rest of the body. Fortunately, there were only 2 legs. As soon as they came, however, they stepped in from of the young man. Ning worried that it was going to be another crack that would lead to an earth pillar forming. Instead, however, the ground split as something came out from the ground. Something cylindrical came out, which the essence soul grabbed onto and pulled. Ning only then remembered seeing this technique during one of the previous matches he had been barely paying attention to. Shit. He couldn't help but cry out as the essence soul pulled out a 10-meter tall sword from the ground. The sword was unnaturally long for the arm, but it handled it as if it were using a dagger. Then, the essence soul took another step as the ground cracked and another sword handle appeared. No, I can't let you take that one too, Ning said and quickly moved forward with immense speed. The wind helped him speed up more than he could himself and he arrived where the ground split. The young man hadn't expected Ning to come to him, but he didn't panic. His hand that went for the sword instead moved toward Ning. Ning used his essence at the last moment to use a rock pillar, to throw him into the air, over the incoming hand. His sword struck the hand as he passed through, leaving a deep cut on it. Arg! The young man cried out in pain when his soul was injured. Ning landed next to the giant sword and cut its handle before creating spikes from all around to jam it into the ground. Through his back, he saw the giant sword falling on top of him. Ning jumped to the side and did a roll before getting to his feet. When he was upright, he saw the sword's hand come at him. The sword was much smaller than the earth sword that was created, but it was obviously stronger. Its reach was only the main problem, and at the moment there was none. Ning quickly used his essence on his sword, creating a spike from the side that parried the sword's hand as it came for him. The sword hand slid onto the ground next to him, carving nearly a meter into the ground. The young man stepped and the crack flowed underneath Ning. Before Ning could realize it, he was pushed upward. Ning cut off the rock spike on top of him at the last moment, but the piece that was split off still hit him in the chest. It fell to the side as Ning was tossed into the air, but it had done its damage. While Ning was strong, he wasn't strong enough to crash onto a large piece of rock and come out unharmed. He felt his ribs hurt. It was maybe even broken. However, before he could care about it, he saw the essence soul swinging its giant sword at it. Ning used his space essence at the last moment, creating a portal above him as the momentum of being thrown up carried him through it. On the other side of the portal, he was directly tossed into the ground far off to the side. He was only trying to regain himself when something slammed next to him. Ning looked to the side and saw the sword jamming to the side, merely a meter away from him. He looked toward the young man and saw him sticking his sword through the portal that he had created. Ning swung with what force right then and halfway through the rock sword. It was too large to cut entirely. Then, as the young man tried to pull back the sword, he closed the portal. The weak part of the sword that had been cut crumbled at the force of collapsing space, and the piece that broke off fell onto Ning. Ning rolled to the side to dodge it and barely managed to escape. He heard something and looked back just in time to see the young man tossing the remaining sword at him. At the last moment, Ning created a giant boulder in front of him, but that was broken into pieces by the force of the sword as the rocks flew back at Ning, most pelting him before he could get back up. Most of them hurt, but one, in particular, hit him in the head, and suddenly coldness covered a part of his face. Even without looking, Ning could tell he was bleeding. Great, he thought. Just what I needed. He saw the young man create another sword and pulled it out from the ground. With that sword in hand, he started walking toward Ning. Ning tried to get back up to fight, but even as he stood up, he stumbled to the ground, dizzy. The hit to the head had given him a bit of a concussion that would take some time to heal. His head was bleeding, his body was hurt, and his ribs were definitely broken. Even so, his opponent came at him with caution, just in case. Ning tried to get a hold of himself, but the dizziness only continued to grow as his bleeding went on. Unfortunately for him, he wouldn't get treated until the match was over. In the state he was in, it could only be when he lost. He didn't want to lose. A part of him told him to let go of such foolishness. There was no need to feel this much pain, this much trouble just to gain nothing. A part of him told him to simply use the system to heal himself and beat his opponent. However, the other part of him told him that if he were to do so, that would be his loss. It would be the same as giving up on what he wanted. It would mean that he was a man that couldn't stick through with what he wanted. He would be a loser. He did not want to lose. I'm not losing, Ning shouted to himself as he punched the ground to push himself back up. I am not going to lose. He knelt on one leg to balance himself, but on the other, he stood. He pushed on his leg to look forward at the young man that came toward him. The young man stopped when he noticed that Ning was halfway up. He worried if he was going to use lightning essence, or maybe use his space essence to get behind him. He kept his senses alert. However, sensing that nothing was coming, he started moving forward again, but he was forced to stop once more when he saw Ning's terrible grin. The maniac face that Ning had at the moment, with one side bloody, was not something the young man had seen in anyone before. I know what to do, Ning said and stabbed his sword onto the ground. You like it, don't you? He asked with bated breaths. You like sending people into the air with your tiny rock pillars. How about I do it to you instead? The young grew alert of his surrounding as he expected a pillar to grow from underneath him. When it did, he would have to move aside. However, when he sensed what he did, his mind went blank for a moment with confusion. Was his essence sense correct? Was it not an illusion? The young man's shock came at the fact that the earth essence that should be forming somewhere underneath him instead formed all around the stage. The stage was a massive ground, and as the young man could tell, Ning was using his sword as a conduit for earth essence. So what was he trying to do by using his essence in such a massive area? The young man immediately believed that Ning had bluffed. He had told him that it was going to be an earth pillar like the ones he had used, when in fact, it was going to be a rock spike. He doubted it was going to be quicksand, as barely anyone had mud essence, and that sword certainly wasn't one. The young man created his own rock pillar, pushing him off the ground and into the air in preparation for the spikes growing from the ground. However, when he looked down, he instead saw that he was falling back down toward the stage even though he had just jumped up. No, the young man realized belatedly. It wasn't that he was falling back down toward the stage, but rather it was the entire stage coming onto him. The speed at which it came slammed onto the young man, hurting him a bit. However, that was nothing compared to the inertia he felt as his body continued to stick with the ground while the ground moved up. The young man couldn't tell how many seconds had passed before it abruptly stopped moving. When it did, the momentum carried him into the air, and from there, he saw the curvature of the plant he was on. Ning's eyes were wide and blank as he looked at the pillar that grew in front of him. Could he even call it a pillar anymore? He looked up, but he couldn't see where the top ended. The audiences were quiet, as well as all of them had their heads pointed toward the sky to see what had just appeared on the stage. The people inside the hall couldn't even see anything, as only the stage was covered in what they saw. So, instead, they ran to the door to see what had happened. The important figures that were in the tower acted like children as they all ran to the window to see it as well. Even from the tower, they had to look up as it was all too tall. The young man that had been tossed into the air saw the curvature of the world. He saw the roundness of the planet. He saw the cloud hovering just a few hundred meters above him. He saw birds that flew below him, and then he saw the continent, so very tiny. He could see the black mountain range from where he was, and it looked so very close to his eyes. Then, he started falling. The sudden realization that he was falling caught onto him when the weightlessness started again. He looked down and saw the messed up stage that had been pushed up. It was over to the side. He was going to fall without landing on it. The emperor stood by the window and caught a glimpse of the young man falling. He turned to his son, the crown prince, and gestured above. "Go grab him before he dies," he said. "Yes, father," the crown prince nodded and stepped outside of the tower's window. Then, the very next moment, wind essence gathered around him and he flew into the air, flying toward the young man that was falling down. As he flew, he looked at what had formed. A massive earth pillar that went as high as 2 kilometers. Even its diameter was so wide that most Earth Essence Soul Realm experts would fail to create something of that width that would go up just 10 meters. How in the hell had a young man created something like this? Ning's dizziness hadn't faded away, but the shock sure as hell helped a lot. His mind felt clear, just as clear as it was confused. The pillar he had created had needed to be wide. He had to finish the match as soon as he could, so he had decided to use a large area. He had an inkling that his sword was made from a mountain from a very long time ago, so he had thought it was time to test it. To test it, he had used as much essence as he could in a short amount of time and poured it all into the sword. The sword, surprisingly, had accepted it all and still wanted more. Ning didn't give it more as that would take some time. Instead, he simply used the essence he poured into it. He created the pillar. However, what had formed could not be considered a pillar at all. To be more accurate, it was a lone cliff that stood tall and strong. It reached the sky, going high up, something Ning hadn't expected at all. No one could have expected it at all. The others were shocked, but Ning was shocked even more so. After all, he was the only one here that knew the sword could accept a lot more essence if he took the time to pour it all. Ning saw something green flash in the air and turned his head to the side. When he did, he saw a middle-aged man slowly drift down with his opponent. When they landed, Ning saw his opponent had completely passed out from fear. Multiple referees quickly came onto the stage, or rather what remained of it, and took the young man from the man's arms. In doing so, many of them bowed to him, calling him, "Your Highness," as they did so. One referee came to Ning as well and grabbed him before heaving him up while he was focused on the royalty. He was being taken away quickly when the person spoke. "Stop," he commanded, stopping the referee in his track. "Is something wrong, Your Highness?" the referee asked. "Don't forget the young man's sword," the man said as he walked to the sword that was halfway into the ground and pulled on it. He paused for a moment and pulled it even more. In the end, he used every bit of energy in his body to pull the sword, but it wouldn't budge. The man stopped and looked at the massive thing in front of him. "Well, I suppose that makes sense," he said. Ning moved away from the referee and went next to the man. He leaned and pulled out the sword easily, giving the man somewhat of a surprise. "That's quite the sword you have," the man said. Ning nodded. "I'm afraid it is not for sale though," he said. The man couldn't help but laugh. "Would you refuse me if I asked to buy that sword?" he asked. Ning frowned for a moment. "I do not know who you may be, sir, but I will definitely refuse," he said. "What if I told you I am Damien Black?" the man asked. "Damien?" Ning paused for a second before his eyes narrowed. "Are you, the Crown Prince?" "That is me," the man said. "I see. It is a pleasure to meet you, Your Highness," Ning said. "But even if the Emperor were to ask to purchase this sword, I would still refuse." "Oh, quite bodacious, aren't you?" the Crown Prince chuckled. "Fine, go on. You need medical attention quickly." "Thank you," Ning said and bowed, before turning around and walking away. The Crown Prince watched him get taken away and shook his head before flying back toward the tower. Damien flew directly through the window, instead of taking the stairs as most others would. He had already leapt out of the window, so he found no shame in doing the same to enter. It might take some time to get rid of the problem that had just been created, the Crown Prince said. We might even have to postpone the matches. The other nobles around him nodded as they saw no other choice. We might indeed have to do that, they concurred. The emperor stared at the pillar and shook his head. That will not do, he said. The matches must end today. But father, the way things are, I don't know how they will. The fight doesn't have to take place at the stage, the emperor said. We have plenty of space behind us in this barren land, don't we? Have it take place there. Oh, the crown prince's eyebrows perked up as that was indeed not a bad idea. What about the audience? Do we just create multiple projections for them to watch the whole thing from here, or should we send them out there too? Tell the committee to do whatever they feel convenient, the emperor said. They can have some earth essence expert to create a few elevated sitting platforms and call it an arena for now. I will let them know, the crown prince said and walked through the door this time around, with a staff member following him to lead the way. The emperor looked at the giant pillar that was in front of him and sighed before sitting down on his seat. Sabern Foreman stood where he was, completely stumped at what he was seeing. The size of the rock that had formed out of nowhere was not something that fit his understanding at all. But one thing was obvious, his son was right, and he had missed the chance of obtaining the sword for himself. Now, if he owned the sword, everyone would know where it can come from. It was a terrible thing to realize. He continued staring at the pillar, trying to come to a conclusion about what he could do now. There was nothing he could do that wouldn't be blatantly obvious, he sighed. Damn it. What the hell even is that sword? How can it create something that massive in such a small time? How have I never heard of this before? Did that kid come from the Springwind continent perhaps? Or the Blue Flame continent? What is going on? Sabern thought with maddening confusion. The emperor stayed seated as he closed his eyes, warding off all the noise and discussions around him. As he started feeling the quietness settle, he remembered the texts he read. The archaic texts. Every emperor was forced to read the texts once they were crowned as one. The texts had the history of the entire world and many important events written on them, all of which were only passed down through the emperors alone. The texts were so ancient that the emperor was sure that only a handful of people would even remember this one event from over 500 years ago. He himself found it hard to recall as it was a text that was written in passing, and what was written was nothing more than a legend to most people. As the impossibility of such an event was simply apparent. But, just because he knew something was impossible, didn't mean it was. For his knowledge could be lacking, which made him think something was impossible. He remained close-eyed for a while, remembering the exact information on the texts he had read, making sure that he wasn't wrong. When he opened it, his son had already come back and was sitting next to him, waiting for him to open his eyes. I have spoken to the committee, he started delivering the information. They have agreed to change the location of the remaining battles. After a brief meeting amongst themselves, they will go and create a temporary arena behind us. They claim that it will not take longer than 2 hours, the crown prince said. We will have to wait until then for them to continue. Are you okay with this? I am, the emperor said. But Damien, the competition no longer holds much importance to us. The crown prince frowned a little. What do you mean by that, father? He asked. Don't you want to see Alan and Elena do well in the competition? Alan is guaranteed to go into the top 4, and Elena will go there too. Then they shouldn't have much trouble moving on to the... Alan and Elena have done well, but it matters not at the moment. Our priorities have changed. We must now consider how we are going to act. The crown prince was very puzzled as his father was speaking only to him. What is going on, father? He asked, looking at the pillar. Is it the young man? No, it is his sword, the emperor said. His sword? The crown prince asked. He could understand being interested in such a good sword, but his father seemed more than just interested. He seemed hungry. What exactly is going on? He asked. You will read of a legend when you become the emperor spoke. The legend speaks of the past, of the world over 500 years ago when there used to be 4 continents in this world, not 3. Along with Glacian, Blueflame, and Springwind, there used to be another continent called the Stonefall continent. However, one day, the continent vanished and what was left behind was pieces of it, that came to be known as the Sunken Lands, the emperor said. Only a few people truly knew what had happened. The crown prince got curious. What happened? He asked. The emperor looked at the pillar. Conversion, he said. They say the majority of the continent was converted, turned into a conduit. a conduit that had since been lost to the world. However, now it has surfaced, and we have to make it ours. We have to get the conduit that is dubbed the name the Continental Sword. That sword is made up of a continent. The Crown Prince couldn't help but ask his father. He whispered the words, but no one was paying any attention to them anyway. About 3/4 of it. The sunken lands is a result of what is remaining, the emperor said. What about the people that lived there? The Crown Prince asked. I don't know. The text doesn't speak about them. It just mentions that after the continent disappeared, someone appeared with the sword and showed it off to multiple emperors. That was how the records were made. As I said, the record was made in passing, but what is written describes the sword perfectly. A heavy sword made up of continent. It looks like a barren, crusted desert, but is instead the many pieces of broken lands that were used to create it, the emperor said. If we can get our hands on the sword, we will have to fear no other continents. We can take over the rest of the region and rule this continent without a single worry or threat. The Crown Prince gulped. But father, I asked the young man about the sword. He refuses to sell it, he said. Did you give him a price? The emperor asked. No, but I think he knows what it is worth now. He told me directly that even if you were to ask it, he wouldn't sell it to you. Then we won't buy, the emperor said. We will just take it from him, whether he likes it or not. That won't work, the prince said. Even if we take away the sword, he would still own it. In the end, it would be his sword. Besides, unless he gives up the sword, it is too heavy for us to take it away. Fine, the emperor said. Then we will kill him if it comes to that. The Crown Prince frowned. What about taking him in, father? Bringing him into the family. Maybe have Elena marry him to bring him into the family so we can use him. Even without the sword, he is someone that can fight Essence Soul Realm fighters with the Essence Manifestation Realm. It takes miracles for someone like him to be born. No, the emperor said without even taking the words into consideration. I must own the sword. If I can't have it, no one can. The Crown Prince frowned. He wanted to explain to his father how his way was better, but of course, he wouldn't listen. His father never truly listened to him when it came to making important decisions. Even the last time he had done something impulsive, Damien had been there to give him another way to solve the problem. He had told his father that he would marry Murodin's daughter to connect the houses, so he wouldn't have to worry about them. If he married the young girl when she came of age, the problem that his father was worried about would not remain anymore. However, his father had instead decided to take the matter into his own hand, and that very night he had burned Murodin's entire family down. Even the girl he loved back then had been burned alive by his own father. He couldn't bring himself to hate his own father back then, but he had decided after that to not marry anyone else. He had wanted to hand down the throne to his brother, but his father had remained headstrong in making him the emperor. He was most likely going to force him to marry a woman, but he was sure he would refuse him when he did. Since that day 30 years ago, he had started seeing that his father wasn't the man he once thought he was. Even so, his father was the emperor. If he gave the order, he would have to follow it, or he would lose his head. Even if he opposed his father, he knew he was a coward at heart. He would follow any order he gave him if his father got serious. If I'm not wrong, the emperor continued, that kid doesn't know just how great of a sword he has on him. The Crown Prince looked back up and toward the window. Staring at the giant pillar that remained outside, he doubted his father's words. I'm sure he knows he has something good. If he still didn't know that after creating such a massive pillar, I would call him an idiot, the Crown Prince chuckled a bit. No, the emperor said. If he knew what the sword could do, he would have used it by now. Damien was confused. But he just did, didn't he? He asked. The emperor finally turned his head toward the prince. What do you think a continent is? Is it just a giant landmass with nothing but rocks? He asked. The Crown Prince puzzled at the words. No, the emperor continued. A continent is more than just the land that forms it. It is the cliffs and valleys. It's the lakes and waterfalls. It river that flows through the land and the sand at the banks of it. It is the crystals, the metals, the lava, the wind. It is the light that falls on it, and it is the shadow that it holds. A continent is more than just one element. It is an amalgamation of everything that it holds. Wind, earth, water, fire, magma, light, shadow, ice, sand, mud, lightning, crystals. everything. The Continental Sword is one that allows someone to access most of the essence that is available in this world. Only a few abstract ones like space isn't available, but they rarely are. If you can get a hold of the Continental Sword, you will be a master of almost all the elements. A true monarch of essence, the Emperor said. The kid might know his sword is special, but I guarantee you he does not know of this. If he had the slightest inkling of how strong his sword was, he would have never shown it to the public, the Emperor said. So, before he figures out the rest of the powers in the sword, we must get a hold of the sword. Even if we have to kill the kid to get it. Ning lay down on the bed as the dizziness finally started to wear off after drinking the medicine that he was given. His pain reduced a bit as well, and the doctors started checking him on what was wrong. You have a cut to the head, not a severe one, but you might want to keep the bandage on it for a few days. Your third and fifth ribs on your right chest are snapped in half. That will require a few months to heal entirely. As for the rest of your injuries, we have applied some ointments. Those should heal within a day or two, the doctor said. Thank you, doctor, Ning said. All right, now, do you wish to concede from your upcoming matches or will you want to fight? The doctor asked. The question made Ning scratch his head as he couldn't choose anything. He hadn't thought of the upcoming matches, but now that he did, he didn't know what it was that he wanted. Can I let you guys know later? He asked. The doctor chuckled a bit. Sure, he said. You can just not show up when the match begins, that works too. Thank you, Ning said. Oh yeah, for your information, the matches have been moved back at least 2 hours, so you have plenty of time to rest too, the doctor said before walking away. 2 hours, huh? Ning thought. He sat alone on his bed with his ripped clothes. He looked around, but every bed but one in this place was empty. And that one was to the young man that he had knocked out. He could basically not be counted as being there at all. It was the medical section of the arena where only the wounded came to visit. While the competition was going on, not even the teachers were allowed to visit here unless in extreme cases. Which meant, he was going to be alone for quite a while longer. He sighed and leaned against the bed, thinking about the upcoming matches. He thought of the brackets. The next fight was going to be the prince versus his guard. Since Hyandus had already mentioned that he was going to give up, the prince was going to win. Which meant, he was going to have to fight the prince next match. Do I want to fight against the prince? Ning thought. Unless he wanted to create a spectacle as he had just done once again, he doubted he had any way of winning the match. Besides, he didn't want to win against the prince. He liked the prince. If I lose there, he would end up in a match for third place. The person he fought was going to be someone that lost to the princess in the semifinals. Huh, the twins are going to fight in the finals? Ice versus magma. For that alone I will have to give up, Ning thought. But not all. I will need to come third. He cracked his fingers. I guess I know who I'm going to have to win against. Ning reached into his storage ring and brought out a pure crystal. As he did, he saw the sword that was in there. Just what are you? He couldn't help but ask. The sword was something that he had fought when he had come to this world on the very first day. Once he had bonded with it, it had been with him at every moment. It had shown some impressive stuff even when he was weak, but what it had done today was simply preposterous. Creating that much land with barely half of his essence was not something Ning had expected it could do. Did you swallow an entire mountain range or what? He couldn't help but ask. When he was ready to use the system again, he would ask it about the sword. For now, he took the pure crystal and started absorbing the essence inside of it. He had lost quite a bit of it creating that massive rock pillar, so the best he could do right now was get it all back. As he absorbed, Ning started getting a peculiar feeling. He thought, isn't this a bit too soon? 2 hours passed very quickly. At that time, another arena was created in the barren land beyond them. Once it was made, everyone was instructed to move over to it as the next set of fights would take place there. For the nobles and rulers in the tower, another window had been created on the other side, through which they could directly view the new arena. From the ease of view, anyone could tell that the arena was made with them in mind. Only the most important arrays were transported over to the new arena, ignoring the other arrays that were more for quality of life than anything. Both the school's members and audience sat wherever they could find a seat. Since this arena was much larger, there were plenty of seats to go around. The prince and the rest walked together with their academy members and sat in a large, open seating area that someone had reserved for them. They all looked at the newly built stage and were excited now that the competition was going to continue. It was already close to 3 p.m., so most wanted the competition to end as quickly as possible. At the very least, they did not want the competition to go on until evening. Due to the lack of lights, it could result in some problems that the new arena wasn't ready to deal with. As soon as most audience members were seated, the host arrived on the stage and quickly asked them for their understanding while telling them that the matches would now continue. The second of the quarterfinal matches began, and then ended as Hyandus notified that he conceded the match. The prince was still a little sour about the situation, but he said nothing. Since the second match was over with the prince's victory, he was announced to move on to the next round. The third match got the crowds cheering. It was a battle between fire and water. Two people with completely opposite skills fought each other, with both neutralizing each other more than they hurt them. One would throw a fire attack, making the other retaliate with water. When the other used a water attack, the fire user would use his own defensive technique to protect himself. The fight continued for a long while before, during the pivotal moment, the water user used her strongest water technique, while at the same time revealing for the first time that she was wearing a wind armor underneath her clothes. The gust of wind disrupted the fire barrier that the fire user had set up, letting the water attack land on him. The water sent the man flying away, and he struck the barrier around the stage, effectively giving victory to the young woman. Once the woman's victory was announced, she left the stage and made room for the final match in the quarterfinals. The princess walked onto the stage when her name was called, and her opponent, a light dance academy student, walked onto the stage as well. Just from the looks of it, the princess's opponent was scared of the fight before the match even officially began. She was terrified of her opponent, and rightfully so. The princess started the fight by showing off her magma essence soul, and the girl's fire essence soul barely held any chance of winning against something like that. She still fought to the best of her ability, but the best she could do was nothing compared to what the princess could perform. Just the fact that the princess was a high essence soul realm expert meant that she would have won even if she had a moonlight essence core. With magma core, there was absolutely no chance of victory for the poor young girl. She tried her best still, doing what she could to try and win it all. However, no matter how hard she tried, the victory was locked from the start. She gave up in the end, as it was the only right thing for her to do. The audience applauded her courage to fight the princess, but they applauded even harder at the princess's victory. Once the match was over, the two of them were sent back to their seats as the quarterfinals were finally over and the semifinals were going to begin anytime soon. It was barely 3:30 when the quarterfinals came to an end, and so they announced that the semifinals would begin at 4 p.m. sharp. The fights had half an hour to rest before they would be forced to fight again. The Blackhawk Academy members waited and looked around. Ten was more nervous than anyone. "Do you think Brother Ning will make it in time? I wonder how his head injury is. Shouldn't we send someone to go meet him?" Caleb asked. "Does he even know the matches are taking place here?" "Headmaster, you should go," Yorsha said. The headmaster sighed. "I've already talked to the doctor. He is okay, but he is still hurt. He is being notified of everything that is happening here, so don't worry. Whether he comes or not will be his judgment to make. Just the fact that he had reached the semifinals is more than enough for me." "But he could win more," Caleb said. "Oh, are you saying he can win against me?" the prince asked Caleb. Caleb shut up for a moment before speaking. "What can you do if he creates another one of those pillars, Prince?" he asked. The prince hesitated a bit. "Damn it, you're right. He does have a chance. Although, I think I know what I can do if he does show up. I've been preparing internally for our fight." The group talked for a few minutes, but Ning never arrived. He was still in the medical room, getting his news about the fights there. Since there was nothing to see this time around, he could only get through to the staff members that passed it along to him. Up in the tower, the emperor looked at the stage and the audience in the arena. "Do you see him?" he asked his son. The crown prince didn't want to help his father with what he was planning, but he failed to do so. "I don't see him," he said. "He must be heavily wounded and getting medical help." The emperor frowned. "He should not be able to leave," he said. His eyes fell on the headmaster of the Blackhawk Academy. "Your elder cousin is down there. Go pass along a message to tell him to not leave once the competition is over until I meet them." The crown prince hesitated but nodded. He walked out of the room and found a staff member. A minute later he returned back. "It is done." The emperor nodded and watched below. He saw a staff member walk up to the headmaster and lean in to say something. Once he said it, the staff member walked away, leaving a puzzled headmaster. He turned his head toward the tower, but he couldn't see inside. Just the fact that he had turned it all told the emperor that the message had been passed along. "We shall do it today," the emperor said. "We cannot delay a matter of such importance." The prince nodded. "As you say, father." Down in the audience, the headmaster was still puzzled. The prince turned and asked, "What did that person say?" "The emperor ordered just our academy members to not leave once the competition is over," the headmaster said. "Oh, grandfather must want to meet us. He hasn't seen us for the last 7 months, so it is understandable," the prince said. "Probably," the headmaster said. That much he understood. What he didn't understand was what he was supposed to do with the piece of paper he was given. The messenger said that he had to give it to Ning, but Ning wasn't there at all. Puzzled, the headmaster stayed where he was, and decided to do as he was asked. For which, Ning would have to come by soon enough. "We shall now begin the semifinals." As soon as the host made the announcement, the whole crowd exploded in delight at the news. They cheered for an entire minute before finally allowing the host to begin with the first match. For the first match, let me call over our 2 combatants. The first is the dark horse of the competition. From the Blackhawk Academy, we have Ning Ruigong. The crowds cheered at his name. As for the second combatant, from the same Blackhawk Academy, we have the Icy Prince, Alan Black. The crowd cheered at his name too, perhaps more so as the females were smitten by his handsome look and his playful demeanor. "What do I do?" The prince looked toward the teacher. "For now, just go on. You will both get disqualified if neither one of you goes onto the stage," the headmaster said. "As for Ning, if he comes, he comes. Don't worry about him." The prince nodded and left. He arrived at the stage in the midst of cheers as he waited for Ning to arrive. Not only he, but the host and the audience waited as well. However, no matter how long they waited, Ning wasn't going to arrive at all. In the end, the prince was awarded his victory and he moved on to the finals. He couldn't feel anything positive about the scenario. It wasn't like he had won the fight to move on. He was simply awarded a victory due to his opponent's absence. Is he heavily wounded? The prince wondered. The same worries went through the minds of many. From what they had seen, Ning had walked away quite easily, but it seemed he wasn't as okay as they had thought he had been. The prince arrived back at the seating area and sighed. Then, the next contestants were called. When the girl from the Ash Wind Academy was called onto the stage, there were few cheers compared to Ning and the prince. But when the princess was called, the cheer returned all over again. The princess stood in front of her opponent who showed no fear, for she knew that fear wouldn't help her win. Confidence would. She was nervous, but she hid it well. When the match began, she immediately brought out her turtle-shelled water essence soul and began attacking the princess. The princess formed a layer of magma that formed a wall in front of her. The wall protected her from almost all the attacks that the young woman could throw against her. Since water evaporated at the touch of the magma, the girl couldn't do anything at all. She continued fighting, but it wasn't a fight to win, but rather a fight to survive. And survive she did. She managed to move around, spending enormous amounts of essence to create tons and tons of water that solidified most magma that tried to flow toward her. Even then, the heat from the steam alone was getting to her. She still tried, throwing water snakes, water geysers, water blades, and even flooding the entire arena. However, none of that worked at all. Alina's magma grew slowly, but steadily, and soon it overwhelmed it all. Her opponent tried to keep up, but against such a strong foe, she crumbled. The referee stepped in to save her at the last moment when a wave of magma flowed in her direction. The girl breathed heavily and sighed in the end after knowing that she had lost. She stepped away from the arena, giving one last look toward the princess and then to the seating area for the Blackhawk Academy. At least, she was going to come third overall from the looks of it. Her academy would be happy as long as she came third. The princess stopped too and left the arena, going back to the seating area. "Yay, sis, we'll finally officially battle each other. We'll finally know who will win," the prince said. "It's obvious, is it not?" the princess said. "I would win." "Ah, don't be so sure about that," the prince said. "You haven't fought me at my best." "And neither have you," the princess answered before looking around. "So, he isn't back yet?" No, 10 answered. I think we need to send someone to tell him that the match for third place is going to happen soon. Someone should be telling him right now. If he cares, he'll come, the headmaster said. He was quite nervous as well as he didn't want to let the chance to have all 3 finalist combatants be from his academy, but he couldn't force someone injured to fight if they couldn't. The host announced that the next match between Ning and the girl who had just lost would take place in exactly 15 minutes, to give some resting time for the girl before her next fight. The girl didn't think she needed it. Her opponent wasn't going to come. Still, just in case, she pulled out a crystal from her storage artifact and started absorbing it. Everyone patiently waited for 15 minutes as time seemed to pass ever so slowly for everyone. Then, when the 15 minutes passed, the host arrived on the stage to begin the final 2 matches of the competition. He called out the 2 contestants. Ning and the girl from Ashwind Academy were called onto the stage. The girl swiftly walked up, but as expected for most, Ning was nowhere to be seen. The host looked around. Well, it seems like, stop. The headmaster suddenly shouted from the seating area and pointed somewhere. Everyone's eyes turned as they saw Ning run into the seating area. Headmaster. Ning shouted. Am I late? Did it start? No, the headmaster spoke toward Ning, who ran to the group. You're just in time. Go, that's your opponent. Huh? Oh. Ning realized he was too late. Wait, the headmaster quickly spoke again. As Ning turned around, he handed something to Ning. I was told to give you this before the match, now go. Ning left for the stage with the paper in hand. People cheered from outside, all more than happy to see him finally come onto the stage. As the black horse of the entire competition, while he hadn't managed to enter the finals, they at least wanted to see if he had what it took to enter the top 3. Ning flipped open the piece of paper and read what was written in. When he read it all, he missed a step in surprise at what was written on the paper. Is this real? He wondered. He couldn't imagine it being real at all. He wanted to go back and ask the headmaster if this was some sort of joke, but his match was already starting, so he continued there. He arrived on the stage, amidst the numerous cheers, and waved his hands at everyone that supported him. Even the host gave a wide smile and walked up to Ning to say something when he paused. His eyes narrowed for a second, almost unbelieving. Was that why he was late? He couldn't help but wonder. You man, he called out to him. You have finally arrived. My apologies, senior. I was told my match would start in 15 minutes, so I rested however long I could. When I did leave, I didn't expect to have to come this far for the match. I'm sorry if I made you all wait, Ning said. That's all right, the host said. Come here, I have to say something to you. Ning nodded and walked up close. When he did, the host placed his arm around him and brought him to one side of the stage. That pillar you created last time, he whispered. Can you create it again? Ning nodded. I can, he answered without hesitation. I see, the man said. Well, I want you to not create it, or do anything that will make us have to switch to another location for the finale. Would you mind that? Not use my earth essence? Ning asked. That was a request to accept. After all, it was the earth sword that gave him the edge against most fighters here. If he couldn't use it then. Not that, just keep it contained so that we don't have to spend hours on cleanup. Anything else, you can do whatever you want, the man said. Ning thought for a moment. So, I just don't have to go overboard, is that correct? He asked. If so, I can accept that. Good, the host said and finally walked away from Ning. Ning thought for a moment about what he had accepted and he didn't really feel bad about it at all. It wasn't like he absolutely needed the sword to win this time around. At least, not anymore. The host announced the penultimate would begin now and walked away from the stage, letting 4 separate referees arrive on all 4 sides for the safety of the 2 fighters. Once there, the referee looked at either side and waited for them to get ready. The woman brought out no weapons, but Ning could tell she wore armor. He had known a little about the fights that had taken place and was aware that she wore wind armor. As for himself, he brought out his sword. The girl flinched at the sight of the sword, growing serious as she worried that she would be sent flying into the air at any moment. Ning smiled and spoke to her. Don't worry, he shouted. I have accepted the committee's request to not use extravagant moves like the last one. You can rest easy that you won't get hit with what my last opponent did. The girl gave a slight grin, but she didn't feel happy about it at all. Even anything that was considered tame compared to what he had shown earlier would still most likely be considered extravagant. She could only trust herself and never her enemy's words. The referee looked at both of them, and once he got the confirmation that they were both ready, he started the match. The girl wasted no time and brought out her essence soul. It was a giant humanoid water essence soul with thick limbs like those of an elephant, with a head that looked like the girl herself, a shell in the back not very different from a turtle, and a tail that came out of the shell that looked more like a snake's tail than anything. While she brought it out immediately, she did not attack so quickly. Haste would be her biggest enemy here, and she had to be ready for when Ning used his techniques. Even without the sword, the lightning essence and the space essence were not something that she was used to handling. If she was careless, he could most definitely get the upper hand in the battle and easily win. Ning looked at the girl and couldn't help but chuckle a little. She was so defensive that she didn't even seem like she was ready to attack. He poured some essence into his sword, creating a few rocks around him that were sent flying toward the girl. A water whip formed in the girl's hand that she spun in front of her, hitting all the rocks that were flying toward her, breaking each one of them. She got back into defense, but she also understood that she couldn't just keep defending, or else she would most certainly lose. She decided to start attacking herself when she paused and her eyes went wide. She looked up front at the young man whom she had believed until now to be someone weaker than her. She just believed that he had more tricks up his sleeves than actual power. However, what she was sensing right now told her that her idea about him could not have been further from the truth at all. The power she sensed, the power everyone in the arena sensed, told them that this was not the same Ning they had seen before. This was the Ning that had broken through to the essence soul realm. As Ning lifted the veil around his core that he had been doing ever since he returned, the people around the arena finally saw just what level his strength had reached. Am I sensing it right? The prince couldn't help but ask himself. He looked around in confusion, but the others seemed just as confused as he was. The princess turned around and looked at her brother. You are sensing this too, right? She asked. He did it, the headmaster said softly. That young man actually reached the essence soul realm in the middle of the competition. No, he did it while he was injured. How did he do it? Ten couldn't help but ask. Wasn't he wounded with little essence in his body just a few hours ago? Forget that, Caleb spoke. This bastard was only at the essence sense realm when he joined the academy half a year ago. Are you telling me he went from that to this in just half a year? Even the teacher that had recruited Ning couldn't help but want to tear his own hair in confusion. He had recruited Ning in hopes that he reached essence manifestation before the competition. And yet, this was simply ridiculous. The ones that didn't know Ning closely weren't as shocked as the members of the academy were, but that did not mean that they weren't shocked at all. People started questioning how he managed to do any of it at all. However, no one could come up with any better explanation than, it was time for him to break through. Even in the tower, the various nobles and rules were talking to themselves about how talented Ning was and how he had managed to break through after his fights. None seemed to understand the reason for it, however. Sabern was near to clawing his own eyes out for not listening to his son just yesterday. Had he done so, he could have taken the sword. Now, not only had the sword's existence been known to the world, but even the owner of the sword itself had gotten too strong for him. Father, what do you think happened? The crown prince asked the emperor. Do you think the young man reached this level by using the sword? The emperor stared at the stage for a while before speaking. The sword did aid, but not as much as you were thinking it did, the emperor said. For anyone to grow and break through, they simply need to refine their core as much as they can in preparation for it to hold more essence. That is the fundamental truth behind breaking through. The reason most people take time is that they either do not have enough essence to refine their core, or they do not have quality essence to refine it. However, as long as you manage to refine it to a level, you will certainly be able to break through the realm rather easily, the emperor said. In this young man's condition, it could be that he has spent a lot of time refining his core with pure essence, and it reached the level of accepting an essence soul realm's worth of essence just now, allowing him to break through. Is that so? The crown prince asked. That must be it. He wasn't sure why he was expecting there to be some sort of mystery here. Perhaps seeing that a legendary sword in a young man's hand had caused him to fantasize about other possibilities he wasn't aware of. The crown prince shook his head at himself for imagining that something more was going on. However, I do not believe that to be the case, the Emperor said. His eyes were on the Black Hawk Academy members. Wasn't the reason why the Essence Heart Academy was disqualified because most of the Black Hawk Academy students were poisoned by them? He asked. That means that this lot, aside from our youngsters, were nothing but replacement, which makes him a replacement as well. Which is to say, he was not strong enough or had studied long enough in the academy to be someone of any worth. As far as I can tell, he was brought here for one thing, and one thing alone. His pure essence. The Crown Prince nodded. That does seem possible, he said. No, that is most likely the case. But what does that have to do with him breaking through? The Emperor closed his eyes for a second and answered. Pure essence is unique. Moonlight essence. The essence closest to pure essence is already very unique, but pure essence is even more so unique. As you can see, the kid can use any technique he wants as long as he knows it. That is because of the pure essence he has. Since it is so unique, it has another property that not many are aware of, the Emperor said. It is capable of refining one's core at an exceedingly fast pace. Even if a person with fire essence core absorbs fire essence, it is still just the pure essence inside the fire essence that is refining the core. Imagine just absorbing pure essence itself, without your body needing to take out anything from it, not needing to convert it, straight dumping it all into your core. Not only that, since you keep pure essence in your core the entire time, even when you don't use it, it still refines your core. As he breaks through, he gets to collect more pure essence, and they refine it even faster for the next realm. In the end, as long as the kid gets a steady supply of pure essence, he will be unstoppable in this world. Whoa! The Crown Prince couldn't help but say. The information had come as quite a bit of shock to him. We cannot let that happen, the Emperor said. Huh? The prince looked at him. But he could be our ultimate savior in times of need. Or our destroyer. Especially with that sword, we cannot take our chances, the Emperor said. After the competition is over, we will have to take his sword, and then kill him. Weren't you about to attack? Ning asked the girl with a massive grin on his face. He couldn't even hide how happy he was when he saw the look of shock appear on the girl's face. That was partially the reason why he was hiding his aura in the first place, to shock people and see their reaction. That alone was quite fun. The girl had stopped in her steps, so Ning threw a few rocks at her to catch her attention and help her focus. A column of water sprung out from the ground like a geyser, swallowing the rocks before disappearing. When the water was down, Ning was already passing through it. The girl panicked and a water whip appeared on her hand that she struck at Ning. A rock pedestal appeared below Ning, and he stepped on it to move to the right. At the same time, he swung his sword to the side, slicing the whip in half as the part that was cut off fell to the ground, wetting the floor. The Essence Soul's face opened its mouth and sprayed water at Ning. Ning stood where he was and created a giant rock to defend himself from it. The rock was struck and the water sprayed all around the stage, but the rock wasn't strong enough to hold itself together as tons and tons of water sprayed directly at it. After about 10 seconds of struggle, the rock broke apart and the water went through to where Ning was. However, at the last second, the girl realized something. The head stopped gushing water and ducked while the remaining limbs and tail went into the shield. The Essence Soul then dropped to the ground, just in time to block the spray of water that gushed through the space portal that Ning had created to return back the attack. The shield took a majority of the damage and was fine, but the force of the water still sent the girl tumbling forward. Before she could gain her footing, Ning had already moved with wind essence covering his body to make him move that much faster. Essence Soul Shield solidified completely and moved unnaturally before the girl. Ning stopped right before the place where the shield fell and slashed vertically at the shield, leaving behind a large gash on the shield. He slashed at it horizontally as well, leaving another wound before he sensed water essence gathering beneath him. He added earth essence to where the water essence was gathering and created a 10-meter tall pillar that sent him flying. He flipped through the air and saw a sharp sword-shaped water destroy the rock he had just leapt off of. Wind essence gathered around him, increasing his friction and slowing his descent. He landed gently and sent many rocks flying toward the shield to pelt at it. However, the entire Essence Soul turned illusory at the last second as everything simply passed through it. As for the girl, she had moved toward the edge of the shield and was getting out of the way. Ning created a decent-sized rock and sent it flying into the sky. While the girl looked up to see if he was throwing it in her direction, he came back at her to attack her again. The girl brought her attention back from the rock and looked at Ning before using one of her signature skills. The essence soul slammed onto the ground on all fours, and the head opened as it vomited out tons and tons of water, immediately flooding the entire stage. Not only was it a lot, it was also strong. The water came at him like waves in the ocean after an earthquake. Alone on the stage, the water looked as large as a tsunami. Ning stood where he was and dug his sword to the ground. Then, two massive flat pieces of rocks appeared in front of him, that dug onto the ground, with a pointed tip that split the incoming tsunami. He added one layer after another until he no longer needed to add any. Then, he looked up at the rock that was going to get devoured by the raging waves and immediately used his skill. A portal appeared at the last moment and the rock vanished into it. At the next moment, he created another pillar of rock that sent him flying over 20 meters into the air. He appeared on top of the water and saw the rock he had portaled away, hit the girl that hadn't expected anything to come at her at all. She was on the ground, trying to get back up, but Ning wasn't going to let her. Even as he fell from the sky, he pointed at the girl with a single finger as if he were using a gun. The girl looked up when she sensed the unique essence and tried to use a defensive technique. But covered in water all over the stage, she had nowhere she could run. A blast of white blinded everyone that saw it as a lightning bolt hit the girl before anyone could even realize it. The thunderous noise of the bolt followed immediately, forcing many to cover their ears at the sound. Ning finally landed in the deep water and looked at the girl who had fallen unconscious. He felt a bit awkward seeing that she had fainted after his attack and hoped that she was fine. The referees hadn't even managed to arrive to protect her even with all four of them. As soon as the first one arrived, he checked on the girl's vitals and quickly confirmed that she was hurt, but she was alive. Ning breathed a slight sigh of relief knowing that he hadn't hurt the girl excessively. One of the referees used his wind techniques to force the water out from a small area and walked up to Ning before announcing to the world. Ning Ruigong of Blackhawk Academy has won the match. Ning walked back into the seating arena amidst noises of cheers and applause. He had gone from someone who shouldn't have even his first match, to entering the top 3 when it should have been impossible for him. People from his academy stood up and cheered for him as he walked up to them. Some slapped him on the back and laughed, while others patted him on the shoulders. Young Ning. The headmaster stepped in between the students to arrive in front of Ning. How did you do it? How did you break through in just a few hours? I don't know, Ning said. I just felt like it was the right time and I did it. Didn't you break through to the essence manifestation realm just a month ago? Caleb asked. How did you do it again so quickly? Well, even if you ask me, I can't really answer, Ning said. I truly don't know how it happened. I just knew I could, and I did. Why did you do it when you were in the middle of the competition? The prince asked. You missed our fight. You nearly missed this one too. Oh that, I was told I had 2 hours before our match, so I thought I had time, Ning said. But I didn't expect it to take so long to create my essence soul. Does it always take this long? How long did it take? Ten asked curiously. Nearly half an hour, Ning said. Half an hour? Multiple people shouted at him immediately the moment they heard him. It took you half an hour to make your essence soul? The princess asked. Yes, was that long? He asked. Hell no. The prince shouted. All of us take anywhere from 3 hours to entire nights to make it, to craft it as best as we could while it tries to do its own thing. How did you make your essence soul in just half an hour? The headmaster said. Well, Ning had an awkward smile. I might have cheated a bit. Cheated? The prince was curious. Well, I'll show you guys once we are done with the competition, Ning said. The rest of them were curious, but they were still respectful enough to not ask him about it. Come here. The prince dragged him to sit next to him. He got close to him and whispered so low that no one but him and Ning could hear each other. How strong are you now? Ning looked at the prince who seemed to have realized it. He couldn't help but smile and say, if I had a little more time, you might have been fighting that girl I just beat. The prince looked at Ning's confident smile and couldn't hide the look of shock on his own face. You damn man, he said as a smile formed on his own face. Once we're back, I'm going to make you fight with me every day and night. No worries, Ning said. I am more than prepared for that. I should train myself more too. The prince smiled. Well, I'm glad you were late then, he said. It gives me a chance that doesn't generally come. He turned toward his sister, who eyed him with an annoyed look as well. Finally, we are going to see who the superior twin is, he said with a fit of laughter. Ning talked to the prince while occasionally answering questions that the others around him asked of him. He answered what he could, but since he didn't have a lot of the answers, he couldn't tell them anything. It wasn't just about his sudden elevation to the essence soul realm that made them curious, but also the skill that he used back on the match that got him admitted to the medical room. They wanted to know how he created the giant rock pillar, which Ning told them honestly. I made it using this sword, he said. Don't ask me about the sword though. I just found it one day, floating next to the beach. I knew it was quite special since back then, but it is only now that I'm finding out that it might be even more special than I could have ever imagined. The stage was cleared up. All rocks and water on the stage were moved away, tossed out of the arena to one side where they would slowly degrade back into essence over the course of a year or two. Since the stage was fixed, the host arrived with loud drums suddenly beating out of nowhere. Lights that had been prepared for a bit shined onto the stage as natural light started dying on the stage. The sudden brightness alerted the crowd into being excited for what was to come. Ladies and gentlemen, the host shouted, it is time for the match you have been waiting for since the beginning of the competition, and maybe even before that. The final match is here. People cheered from all around and the host smiled, hearing all of that. Let me call onto our stage the two finalists, both of whom are from the Blackhawk Academy. The gems of our country, the hearts of our hearts, the royal twins of Blackhawk Dominion. Let me present to you our finalists, Alan Black and Elena Black. The crowd roared in shouts that covered the entire arena. They clapped and turned to where the Blackhawk Academy was located. The prince stood amidst cheers as everyone focused on their group. He waved both his hands with massive smiles on his face, while his sister didn't show much emotion than some slight surprise at the sound. Shall we, sis? Alan spoke as he turned to his sister and a giant grin on his face. Elena nodded and stood up from her seat, and together the prince and princess walked to the stage, surrounded by applause that rang throughout the arena as everyone who had come here today prepared for the last match of the competition that was going to begin anytime soon. The twins arrived on stage and were greeted with great enthusiasm by the host, who was more than happy to see the royals at the finals. He knew that the emperor and the crown prince were up in the tower, and they would be more than happy to see the two of them there. Just as he expected, they were indeed quite happy to see the two there. The emperor had a smug smile on his face as he watched his two direct grandchildren appear as the finalists of the competition that had students from 3 great empires in one place. Congratulations, Your Majesty. The royal family has managed to grow such amazing individuals. They will surely be a great aid to their uncle when he gets the throne. The crown prince smiled meekly at the people that said that, but his smile hid a worry that none of them could see. Not even his own father could see. Of course, the emperor said, they're my descendants. If my own history is anything to go by, they will do incredible. Yes, yes, the nobles said. Who do you envision winning the finals, Your Majesty? The ruler of the Red Raven region asked. I do not care. Neither of them will prove anything to me in this match that they haven't already. Win or lose, they have already made me proud. Of course, the woman smiled and looked toward the stage. Everyone did. The host spoke a bit to hype up the arena while the prince and princess took the stage. The best of the best referees were brought for their competition, as simple ones wouldn't do it for two people that were both in the high essence soul realm. While they prepared, the headmaster remembered something. They were to wait here after the competition ended, which also reminded him of the piece of paper that he had handed Ning. He nudged Ning, who was standing below him on the seat. When Ning turned around, he asked him what had gotten him curious. That piece of paper I gave you, what did it say? The headmaster asked. Ning thought for a brief moment before he remembered that he had taken a paper at all. He had almost erased it from his mind, half believing that what was written on it was fake. Why did you give me that piece of paper, headmaster? He asked. He wanted to know why the headmaster would say what it did on the paper. It wasn't me, the headmaster said. I was told to give you that piece of paper. You were? Ning got curious. By who? The headmaster's eyes moved ever so slightly in the direction of the tower, but it was pretty much imperceptible. He shook his head. I can't tell you that, young man. Just tell me what it said, he asked. Nonsense, Ning answered. Or at least something that sounds like it. It was almost like someone was trying to prank me to make me lose in the competition. The headmaster frowned. Prank? The emperor? He couldn't believe it. There's no way that was a prank, the headmaster said. Are you certain it wasn't anything important? If it was true, then it was important information, Ning said. But it wasn't something I could apply right here. Not if the importance was true. What? The headmaster's eyes narrowed. I'll have to check later to see if what was said in that letter was true or not, Ning said. It's not something I can reveal to the public, even to you, headmaster. I'm sorry. The headmaster nodded. That's all right. There must have been a reason why I wasn't allowed to look at it in the first place, he said. Ning nodded and turned around to look at the stage. He still couldn't believe what was written on the paper was real in any way. But, with all the weird things happening all day, there was no reason not to give it a try. If it was a prank, nothing bad would have happened. If it was true, then he would have acquired a very fascinating asset to his arsenal. His attention wavered at the loud sound of cheers as the prince and princess both brought out their weapons. The prince brought out his signature axe that he had shown so much but hadn't used at all. The axe with the fire essence head and the ice essence shaft made its appearance. Cold white mist dropped off from where the prince held the axe, making for a cool display that got everyone cheering again. On the princess's side, her thin light sword appeared in her hand. She had only used it before when she had her moonlight essence on display, but this time, it was going to be her magma display that she was going to fight with. Neither the prince nor the princess wore any sort of armor at all, as nothing they could wear could possibly protect them from the attacks that were going to come at them. Not only that, they both had essence that was simply too strong to be bothering to use any other essence. The light essence in the princess's sword was merely to distract her opponent. Which made people wonder why the prince even had his axe out. Surely he didn't need the axe to use ice essence, and using fire essence made no sense for someone with ice essence core. However, despite the confusion, the prince was still determined to fight with the axe. The referees looked on either side, and when they noticed that they were both ready, they began the match. Alan did the honor of starting the match by quickly creating a few icicles around him that he sent flying. Elena retaliated by sending 3 small blobs of magma as well toward the prince. The attacks crashed in the middle with the icicles immediately subliming to vapor that created a small explosion that left steam in the air. When the steam was swept away by the breeze on the stage, they both started attacking each other at the same time. Elena started the real fight with a magma javelin that she created in her right hand. She threw it at her brother without hesitation, with the full intention of hitting him in the face. Alan smiled and slammed his leg. 3 spikes of ice appeared from the ground, like icebergs in the ocean, and stopped the magma from getting through, even though they were destroyed in the process. The steam from the boiling ice hung in the air for a moment before it immediately condensed and dropped to the ground as the prince used his own attack. It was a skill not different from Yorsha's burning sun, in which he turned the entire area around him into a freezing hellscape. Ice spread from where he stood and covered the ground. At the same time, snowflakes fell from the surrounding air as the remaining water vapor condensed due to the frigid cold. The princess stood where she was without moving and looked at what her brother was doing without being impressed at all. When the ice started creeping toward her, she thrust her hand forward, and molten magma burst forth from the ground, engulfing the area around her in a blaze of heat. The hot air from the magma met the cold air from the tiny blizzard that the prince was creating, and steam began rising back into the air, creating a layer of visible mist where the 2 temperatures met. The audience was shocked to see one side completely engulfed in magma and hot air, while the other one was frigid cold with ice spikes growing from the ground due to the coldness. When the 2 seemed to be at a standstill, Elena chose to break it again. She used her hand to reach into the magma that surrounded her and spread it forward at her brother. As multiple drops of magma were flung at the Alan, he couldn't use simple spikes to block them at all. He needed something large. Without missing a second, he poured essence out of his core and poured it into the stage where ice crystals grew at a rapid pace. They touched each other, conjoining on top of each other as they turned into a giant ice wall that shielded him from the coming magma. The magma landed on the ice wall and burned through it, but it couldn't go past it. It simply melted the ice and fell to the floor where it became nothing more than hot rock. Elena looked at that and smiled. She slammed her feet onto the ground and a wave passed through the molten stage around her. The wave of lava was barely knee-high at all, but the wave wasn't the problem that was coming at all. When the wave reached the furthest they could go, which was the layer of mist in between the two siblings, they suddenly split into serpents made of magma, that easily glided through the ice path. Elena seemed to be guiding it as they moved forward and dived through the stage itself, going below the ice wall that was protecting Alan. Alan realized what was happening and immediately dropped to the ground, placing his two palms flat on the surface of the stage. Then, he poured his ice essence into the stage as much as he could and began freezing the rock underneath him. The coldness reached the tendrils of magma that snaked toward him, solidifying and no longer able to move. Elena frowned when she realized that she could no longer control the snakes that she had sent in her brother's direction. Alan decided to become proactive as well. He struck the ground with his fist, which shattered the ice wall that was already half melted by the previous attack. As they shattered into 100 pieces, Alan used his technique to send them flying in his sister's direction. Elena waved her hand and the magma that was on the floor around her suddenly moved up like a fabric of cloth as it wrapped around her. The ice shards all landed on the magma cover and did practically nothing to them except leave dark spots when they hit them. The cold from the ice had turned those portions into just rock, which would need to be heated again to become magma. The magma dropped around the princess and she appeared out of it very much unharmed. The crowds were shocked to see that the prince was struggling so much against his sister when they were both supposed to be just as strong as each other. Why was the prince so much more tired than the princess? Was that going to lose him the match? Alan knew that was not the case. While Elena was most definitely not as panicked or fatigued as he was, she was also suffering from the same problem he was, perhaps even more so given that she had fought another enemy before him. They were both wasting their essence fighting each other. The prince was somewhat tired, yes, but that meant nothing in the match when the victory was going to be decided by whoever could keep their essence while making the other one use more. The prince had made a show of creating ice around him not because he wanted to show off, but because he wanted to make his sister create an environment just the same as his. Since magma was denser than ice by a lot, it required more essence to be created. By forcing his sister to create a pool of magma around her, he was forcing her to use her essence in a pretty wasteful manner. While he had somewhat succeeded in that, the princess had also been quite efficient with the magma she was created. Scooping it to attack, sending tendrils of it, using it as a defense. It was obvious that she had also seen through the trick that her brother was trying to use to force her to lose. She wasn't going to. Elena finally gave a massive grin as she prepared her next onslaught of attacks that were surely going to edge her toward victory. The magma surged around Elena like a living, breathing thing that wanted to leave from where it was. With a simple gesture, it elevated to a certain level before descending. Alan prepared for another wave of magma snakes that would burrow underneath the ground to come for an attack. However, that didn't happen at all. The waves that should have come toward him stopped and moved backward, going back to where they first started as two different waves crashed in a circle around Elena, and the force they crashed at sent a layer of magma high into the air. Elena kept the attack going and sent it higher into the air, and then tossed it all in her brother's side. Alan looked at the spray of magma that fell for him. Shit. He cursed. There was too much magma in the air for him to try and use his ice to stop. Instead, he stepped back and pointed a single finger toward the magma. A beam of cold light fell on the magma that was flying in his direction, all freezing at the touch of the attack, turning into solid volcanic rocks that still came in his direction. He then produced a simple ice wall that covered him from the spray of rocks. As soon as the rock shower was over, Alan sent the remaining ice shards from the ice wall toward his sister, who was waiting for it. She sent her own magma projectile, some of which were stopped by the shards, while the rest Alan dodged. Elena dodged the remaining shards too. Alan looked at his sister and immediately used his freezing beam again. Instead of using ice itself, it sent extremely cold air directly at the target. It used a bunch more essence than normal, but that would be worth it for this attack. As long as his sister was forced to use more magma, it would have done its job. Elena gathered the magma around her to protect herself, but that had been the wrong move at this moment. The ice beam froze the magma around her, surprising her at how cold it was. Not only that, the magma had now turned to solid rock, which trapped her as she couldn't quickly get away from there. Alan seized the opportunity and formed ice blades that were so razor sharp that they could cut through even the thickest rocks. he created 5 of them and sent all 5 toward his sister. The blades whistled through the air, moving at a speed that left cold mist behind them. The heat on Alina's side didn't even melt them before they arrived where she was. They all struck the dark rocks that captured his sister, but to his surprise, his sister did not move, and neither did the referees. He realized something had happened, and it only became apparent when the rocks shattered from the impact of the ice blades and what remained underneath became visible. Alina's body glowed orange as a layer of molten rock lay all over her body, like armor. The armor covered every inch of her body, except for her head, which she had purposefully left without any armor to give the illusion that she was a helpless girl who would lose at any moment. The armor was a living thing, melting, moving around the princess's body, showing the curves around her body perfectly. The magma moved up her neck, slowly moving to her head as it covered it all entirely with long tendrils of magma hair flowing behind her and only 2 holes for where her eyes were. A whip appeared in her arm, completely made up of magma, while her light sword was held in her other hand. Alan looked at his sister and couldn't help but chuckle a little. It seemed she was planning to end it all. Mist drifted down from him as ice formed around his body. They grew from all over and slowly encased themselves in it, making layers of it to protect the prince. It covered him entirely from head to toe, leaving a helmet with a simple visor for him to see through. An ice sword formed in his hand while his left hand held his axe. Then, the both of them moved forward at once. The prince was faster and arrived on the magma side, bringing the blizzard that forced everything with him. The temperature of the area lowered, but then it rose once again as the princess poured her essence into the ground, melting it all. The sword fell on Alina's shoulder, doing absolutely nothing while she used her whip on her brother. It wrapped around his body, but Alan used his ice sword to cut right through the whip. The part that remained on him turned into hard rock and broke as they fell to the ground. Alina's whip regrew to cover the part that had been cut off and she struck with it again. Alan dodged the whip, but the end of it caused a sonic boom that sprayed magma all around him that fell on his ice armor. Alan moved in and swung down with his ice sword, but Elena moved backward to dodge. However, as she did, she realized that her brother's sword grew to match the distance that she moved back. She tried to dodge, but it was directly on her left shoulder again. While the sword couldn't get through the armor, the force did, making the princess buckle a little. Rage filled her as she snapped her whip at her brother again. Alan was ready to dodge or block as needed, but suddenly a bright light caused him to flinch back as he was momentarily blinded. He used the axe in his left hand at the last moment as the whip struck him in the chest. Even as he was thrown back, the attack he used activated. A blinding white light struck the princess and immobilized her for a few seconds after it struck her. To everyone's surprise, she had been struck with lightning. People wondered where the lightning came from at all, since the prince wasn't supposed to have any way to use lighting at all. The audience wondered if, just like the princess, he too had dual cores. The prince breathed in and out as the pain in his chest slowly subsided. The princess also got up, bedazzled by the fact that she was electrocuted, and it had been all because it had gone through the holes she had created to break and see. "You," she shouted from afar as she struggled to stand up straight, "you tricked us all." The prince took a deep breath and chuckled. "It's all about the long con, sister," he said. "The more you make someone think something works one way, the more you can surprise them with the sudden twist." The princess's eyes fell onto the axe on her brother's left hand. The white handle of the axe that always dropped white mist from it no longer did. "You made us all think that was an ice handle. You made your own sister think that," she said. "Only grandfather knows what this is, sis. No one else does," he said. Every time he had to fight, the prince brought out his axe to show the fire and ice essence he could use thanks to it. Or so he wanted people to believe. He gave the illusion that it was ice by making it look like it was cold, when in fact, it was his hand that was dripping cold air. All this time, he was making people think he had an ice axe, when in fact, he had been hiding a lightning handle. Because they had the same color and the prince's extravagant use of ice in the early battles, no one even suspected to sense just what element the handle it was. It was all for this one moment when he could use it without anyone getting ready for it. "Are you ready to continue the fight, sis?" he asked her. Alina's eyes grew cold inside the magma armor. "I'm ready to win." "Ha ha." The prince laughed at her. "With how much essence you've wasted in this fight already, we'll have to see if you can do that or not." The princess frowned, but she said nothing. Instantly, the audience was greeted with two essence souls, one of which was only just revealed in the final match. Alina's magma essence soul was 10 meters tall with hands that split into long vines that dripped magma whenever they moved. The soul had no legs, but a single long magma fountain that sprayed all across the ground. The soul's hair freely flowed behind it, dripping magma there as well, just like how her current hair looked with the magma armor. Soon, there was a pool of magma all around Elena as her essence soul came out fully. Alan's ice essence soul was 10 meters tall as well with hands that had fingers made up of icicles. The humanoid soul had two normal legs as well and it had a head that looked like that of a human. On its chin were many icicles that dangled, like a beard to a normal person. Its hair was nothing but shards of ice that stuck up. Massive ice spikes grew from its back, like a porcupine as it all seemed so incredibly sharp. The ice essence soul fell to the ground with a thud and everywhere around it the ground froze as beautiful snowflake designs covered the ground, freezing what was frozen all over. The prince's ice essence soul and the princess's magma essence soul stared at each other for a few seconds before the two of them resumed their fight once more. Alan's soul stuck together its hands and its fingers shot out projectiles that all shot toward the princess. Alina's soul's hands split into vines and snapped at the incoming attacks like the whip he used with her magma armor. She flung orbs of magma back at her brother, who stopped it by freezing it all before it came at her. Then, the prince attacked back. The back and forth went on for a minute and a half, as the two of them stood in one place, throwing attacks at each other. The previous intense fight had died down, which confused most of the audience as to what was happening. Even the students were confused and they looked towards their elders for answers. They both know that they can't win against each other with normal methods, the headmaster explained. Like fire and water, unless one can do something that the other one won't be expecting, the ice and magma attacks were doomed to reach a standstill. So, before they go back to fighting seriously once again, they're doing what they can to make the other person run out of essence. The fight was destined to become one where the person with more essence won from the very start. So they are both pushing each other to their limit to make exactly that happen. Just as the headmaster explained, both Alan and Elena were fighting to expend the other person's essence as quickly as they could. However, there would come a point where one would have to move first. Fighting until they ran out of essence was not the right way to win, so when they were close to running out of essence, the person would attack in desperation to keep themselves in the match. So, whoever moved first would most likely be the loser. The two royals threw attacks at each other as piles of volcanic rock filled the gap between them. Then, the princess suddenly disappeared. When people searched for her, they saw a pool of magma where her spiritual soul had been that was rippling a little. Alan smiled when he realized his sister had disappeared into a tunnel of magma, from which she could resurface anywhere around him. He prepared for the upcoming fight, knowing that if he made no mistake, he would most definitely win. Alan sensed essence moving through the ground underneath him. When he sensed the correct location, he jumped high into the air, his essence soul turning around. Elena appeared in a pool of magma where her brother had been and was not surprised to see him no longer there. No one would wait for her to attack them, so she had already guessed that he would fly into the air. She looked up just in time to see the ice essence soul turn around with his back full of spikes pointed at her. Then, it shot out the spikes. Like bullets from a machine gun, the ice spikes all fell to where the princess was. The princess immediately reached out with the tendrils of her own essence soul, forming a sort of net above her that took the brunt of the entire force. She felt a slight pain in her body because the essence soul took some damage, but it wasn't something she could handle. The net disappeared and a javelin appeared in the essence soul's hand that dripped with magma. She targeted it at her brother who was in the air and had nowhere to go. The magma javelin flew through the air, arriving right where the prince was. A referee moved close just in case, but he sensed some essence being used at the last second and stopped. The javelin went right through the prince, leaving a hole in his body. The crowd gasped in surprise when they saw that the princess had killed her brother. However, when one looked closely, one could see that the prince that had been pierced through was melting. From a clump of ice, the prince reappeared with a sword in his hand that he struck at the princess. The princess moved back and let the lava pool underneath her jump up like a volcanic eruption. The prince stopped right before he hit the wall, but he sent the sword flying anyway. The princess didn't expect that at all and had to abruptly pull back her arm where the sword was going to hit. The sword landed on her light sword, immediately breaking it into a million pieces. The light sword turned back into bright light, disappearing from where it was, no longer to be of any use to the princess. The prince huffed a bit as he felt his core drain every time he used a technique. The ice puppet teleportation technique especially was something that cost a lot of essence. Even so, he knew that his sister had even less essence than him. He just had to keep up. He shot 2 ice blades that flew through the air toward Elena. Elena crossed her arm, letting the magma armor she wore take the brunt of the damage. The princess was sent flying backward, but she hadn't been damaged at all. She quickly got back up, revealing 2 large black streaks that remained on her armor where the blades landed. The frozen rock was not turning back into magma at all. Alan's eyes widened in surprise. Elena was terribly low on essence. He pointed a finger at the princess and suddenly used his ice beam. The princess tried to dodge it, but her left arm was hit once again, leaving a black rock that covered the entire left arm all the way up to the shoulders. She tried to move her arm, but the most she could do was crack the rocks. She needed a few more seconds to fully get it off, seconds she did not have. The prince sent 2 more ice blades. The princess used her whip to hit both of them, destroying them before they even got to her. However, in the process, she destroyed her own whip. She threw away the remaining whip and looked at her brother's angry eyes that only he could see through the 2 holes in her magma helmet. The prince was short of breath, but he was only moments away from victory. He could sense absolutely no essence from his sister, so he knew he was going to win. He just had to force her to use any if she was hiding before dealing with the final attack. The prince's essence soul turned around once again, sending out a barrage of ice spikes in the princess's direction. The princess quickly jumped to the side, rolling around quickly to dodge the incoming attacks. She got back up and jumped again as another volley of ice spikes landed where she was. When she got back up, she was short on breath. The magma on her body was starting to drip away as she could no longer keep it up. Her essence core had run dry completely. The prince saw that and realized what had happened. His sister had indeed run out of magma essence. She still had her moonlight essence core, but that was a low essence soul core. It could not be used during their battle at all. He had won. "I'm sorry, sis," he spoke, "but I win." The ground stirred as all the ice around him started shaking. They all came toward him, gathering near him like metal shavings close to a magnet. When they all gathered, it was enough ice to fill up an entire house. And then, the prince sent it all in his sister's direction. A wave of snow and ice all flew sky high as they all dived toward where the princess was. The princess's face changed from frustration to nothing as she gave up on trying to get away. The pile of ice slammed onto her, like an avalanche it drowned her completely. The ground shuddered at the weight of the ice and then everything went still. The prince finally slumped to the ground, having used every last bit of essence in his body. He had won. He smiled and was ready to cheer when a warm orange light grew from the pile of snow. Before the prince realized what had happened, something stirred in him. From right next to him, the princess appeared through a pool of magma with a javelin in her hand. She pointed it at the prince's neck. "No, I win."